Pisarcik.
Ms. Pisarcik, were you Lyle Menendez's girlfriend for a period of time?
Yes.
And when was it that you first met him, please? What year?
1986 in the fall
And where did you meet him?
in Princeton, New Jersey.
And how long was it after you met him that you became his girlfriend?
Shortly after, within weeks.
And from the time you met him in 1986 and became his girlfriend until a later point in time, did you continue to be his girlfriend until some specific month and year?
Yes.
And when was it that you first broke up with him?
I first broke up with him in the spring of 1989.
So that for a period of the fall of 86 until the spring of 89, you were his girlfriend, correct? Do you remember what month it was that you and Lyle had broken up in the spring of 89?
I believe it was April.
Then did you and he get back together?
Yes, we did.
Was that after the death of his parents?
Shortly after, yes.
Now, in the spring of 1989, had you ever been to the Menendez home in Beverly Hills?
In the spring of 1989?
Yes, by that time, had you ever been to the Menendez home?
Yes.
And do you recognize the woman who just left the courtroom?
Yes.
And who do you recognize her as being?
Flora, the maid?
And had you seen her at the Menendez home when you had visited there in Beverly Hills?
Correct.
Now, at some point, did you learn that, were you aware of the fact that Lyle Menendez had gone to obtain a wig?
Yes.
And could you tell us when it was that you first became aware of that?
I went with him. It was in Birmingham, Alabama.
And what month and year was it that you went with him in Birmingham, Alabama?
I believe that was the spring of 1987.
And at that time, did he have thinning hair on top?
Yes, he did.
And it was something that was noticeable to you?
Yes.
Had you discussed with him his idea about getting a hairpiece in the spring of 1987?
Yes.
And at that time, did he acquire such a hairpiece?
Yes, he did.
Were you present in the Menendez home anytime after that when you had a discussion where Eric Menendez participated in a discussion about Lyle Menendez's hairpiece?
Objection leading.
Yes.
Okay, could you tell us where you were physically located when this discussion took place?
In Eric's bedroom.
And where was the bedroom inside of the house?
It was on the second floor.
And do you remember where you were seated at the time or standing?
I was standing in the doorway, and
Okay.
Eric was at his desk.
And was anyone else present aside from you and Eric?
In the house, yes, but not there at that, in that room.
Okay, could you tell me the nature of your conversation with Eric Menendez at that time?
I'm going to object to this as Vegas time. To no
Very
foundation.
much. Try to pinpoint,
Okay. Do you remember what month it was that you had this conversation with Eric Menendez?
Not exactly, I do not.
Was Lyle Menendez at the home with you at the time?
Yes.
Was he on break from college at the time, or do you know okay, let me back up. Do you know what his status was as a college student in the spring of 1989?
He would have, in the spring of 1989, been at Princeton.
All right, but when you had this conversation, you
Right.
were in Beverly Hills.
Right, so it would have been either summer break, probably the summer break.
And could you tell me then what time of day it was that you had this conversation with Eric Menendez?
I'm going to object again as Vegas time. I mean,
Okay, objection overruled.
Okay, do you remember what time of day it was that you had this conversation?
I don't remember exactly.
Okay, and who started the conversation about Lyle's hairpiece?
I believe Eric started the conversation.
And what did he say?
He was just amazed. He was kind of joking because he was amazed that Lyle all this time had the hairpiece, because Lyle had the hairpiece for a while prior to that, and he didn't know, and that was why he was amazed, because Lyle's hair always looked so perfect.
Okay, did he indicate? All right, and did he indicate to you that he hadn't known about it up until the time of your discussion?
objection leading.
Overruled.
Yeah, he did not know right from the start when Lyle got his hairpiece. He did not know initially, but he had found out at some course
Okay, and
during the time.
when you had
Objection, speculation, move to strike.
Objection sustained, but he did find out, and the rest of it was speculation, or at least there's no foundation as well.
Okay. Was it your understanding when you went with Lyle Menendez in 1987 to Birmingham, Alabama, that he did not want people to know that he was wearing a hairpiece?
No, he was more concerned with the fact that he was losing his hair and he didn't want people, when he went back to Princeton, to realize that he had gotten a hairpiece. He wanted to have this hairpiece before he went into Princeton, so it would not have been as noticeable if he was in Princeton, say, for a year or two and then got his hairpiece. He thought it would be more noticeable then as compared to if he had gotten it upon going into Princeton at the beginning.
Now, when you had the conversation with Eric Menendez at the Beverly Hills house, sometime I believe you said you think it might have been the summer.
Close to the summer, it would have been actually prior to that, or late spring, early summer.
Okay,
What
and
year?
of 1989, is that correct?
Correct.
And when you had the conversation with Eric Menendez in the Beverly Hills house in 1989, did he indicate to you how he had found out that his brother was wearing a hairpiece?
Objection, Your Honor. It assumes facts not evidence.
Right. During the time that you had a conversation with Eric Menendez, did he indicate to you that he knew that his brother wore a hairpiece?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This is leading. I mean, why don't we just hear?
Objection overruled, counsel. Your question, do you understand the question?
If you could repeat it, please. I did not hear it all.
All right. Why don't you, I believe you indicated that you had a conversation with Eric Menendez in 1989 in the Beverly Hills house. You were standing in the doorway. He was sitting at his desk. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the subject matter of the discussion was, what was the subject
The
matter?
subject matter was Lyle's hairpiece.
And I believe you indicated that Eric Menendez brought up the subject. Is that correct?
Objection to state the testimony.
All right, why don't you just ask what was said?
Okay, I'll ask again exactly what was said and who first said it.
I don't remember exactly how the conversation did start, but I do remember because Eric was, surprised, and because Lyle had such perfect hair. That's what I remember.
And did he indicate to you what he thought the perfect hair was attributable to? In other words, did he indicate to you that he knew something about Lyle's hair?
Objection
Just that-
leading.
Overruled.
Just that he did have the wig on, that he was wearing a wig.
And did Eric indicate to you how he knew that when you had your discussion with him in the spring of '89?
I do not remember the exact wording that Eric said as to, how he found out.
At the time that you had your discussion with him in 1989, was it clear to you that Eric knew that his brother had a hairpiece?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. His speculation is irrelevant.
Overruled. Your answer?
Yes.
And then you broke up with Lyle in April of '89, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you go to the house in Beverly Hills at any time after that? Between April of '89 and when the parents were killed, did you have any other trips to that Beverly Hills house?
No, I did not.
Thank you. I have nothing further in front of both jurors.
All right. And what is let me see counsel at the sidebar as far as the time estimate here for the balance of the examination. What's going to happen now is that there will be some testimony before the Lyle Menendez jury only. The time estimate is that it'll be approximately 30 minutes. And during that time, the Eric Menendez jury doesn't have to be here. After that is completed, then there will be cross-examination of the witness or examination of the witness before both juries. So what I'll do is take a recess now until 10 minutes after the hour for everybody. And then we'll pick up at 10 minutes after the hour with just the gold jury in the courtroom. And then we'll ask that the blue jury come back. And assuming this time estimate is accurate, we should be starting up again with both juries around 3:40 or thereabouts. So if you can all get back here so we can start up with you around 3:40 with a blue jury, then hopefully we'll be in sync and we'll have both juries back in the courtroom. And I haven't forgotten the discussion I'm going to have with you regarding the schedule for the balance of the trial. I just have yet to get a definitive answer from all the lawyers as to what exactly is going to transpire. And until I do, there's no sense giving you information that is going to have to be amended or corrected after they give me more information. So I'm going to hold off a little bit further before I get there. So what we'll do is take a recess now. 10 minutes after, we want the gold jury back in the courtroom, and the blue jury, if you could return at 3:40 so that we can resume with both juries. You may continue your direct examination.
Thank you, Ms. Pisarcik. I believe now we're to April of 1989, which was the first time that you and Lyle Menendez broke up. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then you and he got back together after his parents' deaths. Is that correct?
Correct.
And at some point, did you and he become boyfriend and girlfriend again?
Yes.
Do you know approximately what month it was that you and he began your relationship?
Well, we had seen each other several times this summer, even though we had broken up. We had seen each other when he would come back to New Jersey several times during that summer. And we were actually supposed to be at a tennis tournament the weekend of his parents' death. We were supposed to meet him there at that tournament in Vermont. I did go to that tennis tournament, but he did not show up at the tournament. So we had talked to each other prior to that. And then it was shortly after his parents' death that he called me and asked me to please attend the funeral in New Jersey. And we saw each other there.
All right, now let's back up. I believe you indicated that he asked you, it was your understanding he was going to be at a tennis tournament the weekend that his parents died?
Yes.
And how many days before that was the last time you had spoken to him about meeting him at the tennis tournament?
Probably a week or so. And I talked to his mother also because she was setting up the arrangements, the tournament entry.
And when did you speak to his mother, if you recall?
Approximately a week prior.
All right, so that would
To the
have
tournament.
been on the weekend prior to the tournament?
I don't remember the exact day, but roughly a week or so before.
And when you spoke to Mrs. Menendez, was it your understanding that Lyle Menendez was going to be attending the tournament?
Correct.
Do you remember what day of the week you arrived at the tournament?
It was a weekend tournament, so I probably got there on Friday.
And at some point you learned that Lyle Menendez was not at the tournament, is that correct?
Correct.
Where were you physically located when you spoke to Lyle Menendez for the first time after his parents' deaths?
I was back in Lawrenceville, the Princeton area. Where I had spoken to Lyle, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes, I was back in Lawrenceville after the tennis tournament.
So it would have been during the week, is that correct? And so you went to the services in New Jersey, is that correct?
Yes.
And then sometime after that, you became his girlfriend again?
Yes.
All right. And were you his girlfriend in March of 1990 when he was arrested for the murder of his parents?
Yes.
And shortly after his arrest, did he contact you telephonically or by a jail visit and ask you to do something in relation to some property of his in his car?
Yes.
Could you tell me how the contact was made? Was it over the phone or was it when you visited him?
I believe it was over the phone. He was, because I had not seen him yet.
All right. So was this the first contact you had with him after his arrest?
Yes.
And when you spoke with him over the phone, did he ask you to get something out of his car?
Yes.
And could you tell me what he asked you to do, please?
There were a box of private letters that he had asked either myself or asked me to have someone get those for him.
Did you get those letters or did you have someone do it?
I did not. It was Glenn Stevens.
Did you personally ask?
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Okay. Did you personally take any letters out of Lyle Menendez's car?
No, I did not.
Did you ask anyone to do that on his behalf?
Yes,
Who did you ask?
Glenn Stevens.
Thank you. After his parents' deaths, did Lyle Menendez indicate to you who had done the killings or his idea of who had done the killings?
Right after their deaths?
Well, okay. Shortly after his parents died and you became aware of it and you went to the memorial service, you began to resume your relationship with Lyle Menendez.
Correct.
Did he indicate to you any particular group of people who were responsible for his parents' deaths?
Yes.
And who did he indicate to you?
He said it was either the mob or the mafia or someone business related to his father.
And did he tell you this on more than one occasion?
Yes.
Now, at some point in the summer of 1990, after Lyle Menendez had been in custody for a while, did you move into the family's Beverly Hills home?
Yes.
And was it someone's suggestion that you move into the Beverly Hills home?
Yes.
Whose suggestion was it?
It was Lyle's.
And did he give you a reason that he wanted you to move into the family's Beverly Hills home?
Yes, he did.
And what did he tell you?
He said for my personal safety, he felt it was a safer location than in the apartment that I had been living in. at the time.
Now, during this period of time, March, April, May, and June of 1990, were you in love with Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
At that time, what was your status in terms of marriage? Did you have a status in terms of marriage?
Well, we had been engaged prior to that.
When was it that you had been engaged previous to his incarceration?
We were engaged from the spring of 1988 to the spring of 1989.
And was the engagement broken at or about the same time that you broke up your relationship with it?
Yes, it was.
And did you make any plans after he was incarcerated regarding marriage? Was there any kind of discussion about that, if you recall?
Yes.
And what was your understanding of what your status was regarding Lyle Menendez?
Well, he had asked me to wear his engagement ring again at the time that he was in jail. And obviously there were no plans made at that time. But
Did you begin to wear his engagement ring again?
yes, I did.
Did you go to court when he went to court to support him?
Yes, I did.
And did you believe at that time that he was not involved in his parents' murders?
Yes.
And at some point, did you begin to have doubts about your belief?
Yes.
In December of 1990, approximately December of 1990, did you go to the county jail and have a very upsetting discussion with Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
Prior to going to the county jail in December of 1990 and having this discussion, had Lyle Menendez asked you to do anything for him while he'd been incarcerated regarding research at the law library?
Yes.
Could you tell us what he asked you to do, please?
He asked me to look up several cases. And at the time, he gave me the case names and numbers, if there was a number to them, and asked me to look those cases up and get copies made of them.
And did you, in fact, try to obtain copies of cases for him?
Yes.
Where did you do that?
At the Santa Monica Law Library.
And where is the Santa Monica Law Library located?
It's in Santa Monica on, I believe, 4th Street, where the courthouse is.
And did you ever go to Santa Monica to any court proceedings that Lyle Menendez attended during the summer of 1990?
Yes.
And did you go to court to support him during that period of time?
Yes, I did.
What was the nature of the case? Well, let me ask you this. Did you ever read any of the cases that Lyle Menendez asked you to look up?
Well, I read parts of them, yes.
And did you get a feel for what kind of cases you were looking at?
Yes.
Could you describe the nature of the cases that you were asked to look up in Xerox for Lyle Menendez?
The cases were situations where children had gotten off after killing their parents.
Were there any other kind of cases, any other subject matter of a criminal nature that was involved in these cases you were asked to look up?
Not that I recall.
Anything about child molesting?
I believe so, yes. I mean, the cases were, child molestation, and children had killed their parents and gotten off.
Now, when you read these or looked at portions of these cases, did you ever begin to have any doubts about what you thought about Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
And during the period of time that you were still his girlfriend, did he ever ask you to get any books for him so that he could have reading material?
Frequently.
All right. And did you, in fact, obtain those books?
Several times a week, yes.
How many times?
Several times a week. Sometimes, whenever he wanted, basically.
Could you tell me the nature of the kind of books that he asked you to get?
There were all different kinds of books.
Do you remember specifically the subject matter of any of the books?
Several, yes.
Okay. Could you tell me the subject matter, please?
There was one, the subject matter was sign language. And the only other title I specifically remember was the Billionaire Boys Club.
The Billionaire Boys Club?
Correct.
Had you ever had any discussion with Lyle Menendez about the Billionaire Boys Club before the time that he asked you to retrieve this book?
No.
How was it that you were able to get the books to him if he was incarcerated?
When I went to like Walden Books, a lot of times Walden, they have a service that they will actually, you buy the books, you pay for them, and they will ship them for you.
And they'll ship them anywhere?
Yes. They
Right.
would, and they had a certain way to, I guess, make sure they were obtained by the people at the jail.
All right. Which Walden Books did you go to, if you recall?
Usually the one at the Beverly Center, but there were very many different bookstores.
Now, after you were asked to do this research at the law library in the Santa Monica courthouse, then did you ask Lyle Menendez in December of 1990 to discuss with you? Well, let me back up. Did you have a conversation with him in December of 1990?
Yes,
And that was at the county jail.
correct.
Were you alone with him at that time?
Yes, I mean,
That's
yeah.
hard. Were you the only visitor to Lyle Menendez at the time that you had this discussion?
yes,
And you were in a room with other inmates and other visitors?
correct.
And did you ask him to tell you something?
Yes,
What did you ask him?
I, at that time, wanted to know the truth.
And what happened?
At that time, Lyle held up a letter because he did not want to discuss this over the phone system that was there. So he held up a letter, and it just described that he and Eric had killed their parents.
Now, before I ask you more questions about this particular letter, could you describe the accommodations there? Is there a screen of some sort of material like glass?
Glass, it is glass.
And that separates you from Lyle Menendez?
Correct.
And how is it you are able to speak at the county jail when you go to visit? Is it over a phone or do you talk through a hole in the glass?
It was usually a phone.
All right. And so on this particular occasion, the way that you communicated, when you asked him to tell you the truth, did you do that over the phone or did you write something or how was that done?
I believe I wrote it down also.
All right. And then I believe you indicated he held up a letter for you to read.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
How many pages was the letter, if you recall?
It was very lengthy. I did not complete reading all of it because he took part of it away after I had gotten to a certain point in the letter.
How far did you read in the letter?
I read several pages.
And you said at some point he took the rest of the letter away?
Yeah.
Okay. Sitting here today in 1993, do you remember every word that was written in the several pages you read?
Not every single word.
Okay. Can you
But-
tell me essentially what the letter said that you read that Lyle Menendez held up for you that day?
The letter just said that he was very sorry that he had to lie to me for so long. But that the truth was that he had killed his parents, he and Eric, and that the reason was that Eric had been abused by his father and Lyle had been abused by his mother.
And was it at that point that you stopped reading or was it at a different point?
That was when I stopped reading.
And when you stopped reading, did you say anything to him?
Yes.
What did you say?
I said, I don't believe you.
And then what happened?
Then he cried and I cried, and I never did get to finish reading the letter. He
How
pulled
long-
it away.
Pardon me?
He pulled it away.
All right. So when you got to the point of the letter in which there was an indication that the father had molested Eric and the mother had molested Lyle, was that as far as you read?
Yes.
And how long did you stay there at the jail within Lyle Menendez's presence after you had read that?
I was there probably for at least another 20 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes,
What were you doing during that period of time?
crying.
At some point after that, did you break up with Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
About how long after this particular incident was it?
Shortly after, I would say several weeks to a month afterwards.
Did you have any further discussions with Lyle Menendez about what you'd seen in the letter after you'd seen the letter?
Yes.
And were those discussions at the county jail?
Yes.
Now, sometime, not during the conversation that you've just related to us, but at another time, did you have a conversation with Lyle Menendez involving a movie called At Close Range?
Yes.
And was that on a different occasion from the occasion you've just told us about?
Yes, it was.
May I approach, please, Your Honor, with Exhibit 248?
Yes.
Now, in November of 1992, did you give a statement to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office?
Yes.
And was that to myself and Mr. Kuriyama and Detective Zoller, and there was a court reporter, like the lady sitting in front of you, who took it all down?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm going to show you a portion of the transcript, which I believe was shown to you earlier today before you testified. Did you get a chance to review this exhibit, which is 248?
Yes.
And is this transcript what you told Mr. Kuriyama, myself, and Detective Zoller Is this a portion of what you told us on November the 30th of 1992
Yes,
regarding the movie at close range?
correct.
Thank you. Now, at some point, did you ever ask Lyle Menendez why he hadn't run away?
Yes.
Do you remember during which conversation it was that you asked him why he had not run away?
I believe that it was the conversation that when he told me that he and Eric had killed their parents.
But I believe you've indicated that you had subsequent conversations with him after this, the first one where you found out.
Correct.
And what did he tell you in regards to running away?
He just said that he would have liked to run away, but Eric did not want to.
And that's what he told you during one of these conversations after you found out he was responsible for the death of his parents?
Correct.
Okay. I have nothing further of this witness at this time.
The agreement still is that the next portion would be before both juries? Okay, let me see if we have jurors outside, and we'll do a count of our jurors, the blue jury. And we now have the blue jury in the courtroom as well, and we'll now resume with the examination of the witness before both juries, cross-examination.
Ms. Pisarcik, I believe that when we had both of the juries here, you began your testimony today by talking about a conversation that you had with Eric Menendez. Is that correct?
Correct.
And can you tell me, to the best of your recollection, when that conversation took place?
The spring of 1989.
Okay, now you had said earlier spring or summer. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
But you think now that it wasn't summer, but that it was spring.
I think it was the spring.
And when you say spring, what months are you talking about?
I'm not sure to be exact.
Okay, well, can you get close for us?
It could have been around spring break, so March or April.
Okay. And would it have been a visit that you made to California with Lyle Menendez?
Correct.
And how long were you out here?
I do not recall.
Do you remember if it was for a day or if it was for
When
a
I came
week
to
or-
visit California, it was usually for at least a week, sometimes two.
Okay. So you think that this was a week or 2 weeks that you were here?
It could have
Is
been.
that correct?
It could have been.
And you think it was either March or April?
It could have been, yes.
Okay, well, when you say it could have been, you'd said spring or summer. So I take it we're talking late spring, early summer, or
Sometime before April. I do know that.
before, so it wouldn't have
It
been
could
in
have,
April.
could have been in the month of April, yes, because Lyle and I did break up in late April.
So you believe that it was, you were here in April, that's your best estimate at this point in time?
It could have been March or it could have been April.
Okay, but one of those 2 months. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were here for a week or 2 weeks. Is that correct?
It could have been, yes. I don't remember exactly.
Well, give me the range. It wasn't a one-day trip, I take it.
I rarely came out to California for one day.
Okay. So
Could have been a long weekend. It could have been 4 days, or it could have been 2 weeks.
okay, so it could have been a 4-day weekend up to 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And it could have been in March or in April.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
And when you came out here, I take it that Lyle was with you the entire time. Is that correct?
Objection, Vegas to
We're talking about this visit, Your Honor. The spring of '89 visit. Was Lyle with you
Yeah, he was present,
the whole
correct?
time? Okay. And was Eric there the whole time?
I do not remember that.
And was Mrs. Menendez there the whole time?
That I don't remember either.
And was Mr. Menendez there the whole time?
I don't recall.
What things did you do on that trip? Do you remember anything else about it?
Play tennis. I just was there visiting Lyle, basically.
Now, visiting Lyle because he was living there at the time? Or because he was home visiting his parents?
I don't remember if he was on spring break or if he was out of school at that time. I don't recall.
What do you mean out of school at that time?
Well, Lyle went to Princeton, then he took a semester off, and then he was working. And,
But this was the spring of '89.
correct.
Do you remember whether he was in Princeton the spring of '89?
Yes, he was.
So if he was with you,
It must have been spring break.
which would have been when? Do you know?
I'm sorry, I don't know when Princeton, I don't recall when Princeton has their breaks.
And do you remember any other friends of his or of yours that you saw when you were out here? That particular trip?
I'm sure Edward Fenno could have been out there because Edward did live with the family for a time.
Okay, but do you remember seeing him on that trip?
I can't recall specifically. I don't remember.
And do you remember anything you did on that trip?
Played tennis, went out with Lyle to dinner, those type of things that we did every day.
Right, but you don't have a particular memory that you went to Disneyland or you went to Catalina or you saw a particular movie?
No, I don't.
You don't
recall.
remember any restaurant that you ate at?
No, not. It was a long time ago.
Okay. Do you remember anything about that trip in specific other than the conversation you've just related to us?
Just that I was here visiting, and
You don't remember the date you arrived?
not exactly. No, I do not.
Do you remember the airline you came out on?
No.
Do you remember the date you left?
No.
And you don't remember any activities from that entire trip? Is that
Well,
correct?
Yes, I do remember seeing Lyle and Eric and his whole family.
So,
And Lyle, as a matter of fact, Lyle and I did go to a play in Westwood. I do recall that.
what did you see?
We saw Hurly Burly
And where was that? What there?
at the Westwood Playhouse. I do remember that.
And who went with you? Anybody?
Just Lyle and I.
And do you remember, you said that you remember now Mrs. Menendez and Mr. Menendez and Eric being around. Is that correct?
Yes.
But you don't remember for how much of the visit?
No.
Just some of it?
They could have been there every day. I don't recall.
Now, you testified that you went into Eric's bedroom. You're standing in the doorway of Eric's bedroom. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how did the conversation get started?
I do not recall exactly.
What was
I believe-
it your custom to talk about Lyle's hairpiece to other people?
No, it was not.
Okay, so this was something that he was self-conscious about, I take it.
It was a private matter in a way,
So how did the conversation come up with you and Eric? Did you bring it up or did Eric bring it up?
I believe Eric brought it up because he had been surprised.
Well, I'm just wondering what triggered the conversation. Were you standing in the doorway having a conversation with him or just walking by or what?
I believe I remember just standing in the doorway as I often, came by to just say hi to Eric or whatever, or passing by, popped my head in to say hi to him.
Okay, and he said,
I
what a
believe-
surprise.
Well, I believe we had been talking and he brought it up.
Okay, and what did he say?
He was kind of laughing. And that's why I do remember it so well, because he was laughing and he was surprised that he never knew before. And that he just thought Lyle always had perfect hair. And he couldn't believe that his hair was always so perfect.
And this conversation was March or April of 1989.
That is what I remember, yes.
Now, you were working at that time, weren't you?
Correct.
Where were you working, Ms. Pisarcik?
I would have been teaching tennis and playing tennis on the women's pro tennis tour.
spring of 89?
Correct.
That's your memory?
Yes. Because I played on the women's tennis tour. Yes.
Are you as sure of that as you are of your testimony about the hairpiece?
Yes.
What will the answers be?
You are that sure?
I'm sure.
And did you have any other job the spring of 89?
I was also attending school in the spring of 1989.
And did you have any other job?
I was a waitress also
Where were you a waitress?
in several restaurants.
And
In-
which restaurants in particular?
TGI Fridays,
Mhm.
and I did that for a short period of time as I was teaching tennis lessons, and then I was also at a Mexican restaurant too that I can't recall the name of that.
How's Casa Lupita sound?
That was it. Thank you.
And you were working at Casa Lupita in the spring of 89, is that correct?
Correct.
And you were also teaching tennis.
Correct.
You were also on the tennis tour.
Yes, I
You were
played
also
several
going to
times.
school.
Correct.
And you were also working at TGI Fridays, is that correct?
No, I did not work at TGI Fridays and the Mexican restaurant at the same time.
And, Your Honor, may I approach? Move forward, please. Can you give us an estimate of which, if it was March, which week in March it would have been that you were at the Menendez home?
No, I cannot.
So you don't know if it would be the first week of March
It was a long time ago. I do not remember.
or the second week of March?
I don't know. Can't remember.
Your Honor, I'd like to mark collectively at this point in time, if I may, work records for Jamie Pisarcik from Casa Lupita for the spring of 1989. Prosecution hasn't had a chance to see them, but since I need to go through them with Ms. Pisarcik, we can perhaps do it at the same time.
Are all of those envelopes containers for the same information?
They all relate to different days.
Okay. For the same employer.
That's correct.
All right, 367 then
Thank you.
collectively, but if we're going to refer to them separately, we can remark them.
I'd like to, if we do them separately, then I would request permission to just do letters A and B and C, et cetera, for Camden 10, 367.
Okay, if we have to, but let's see if we have to do that.
Thank you. Ms. Pisarcik, I'd ask you to look at the documents before
Okay.
you. Have you ever seen the work records from Casa Lupita before?
I can't say that I haven't. I don't. They don't look familiar to me right now.
And is this a statement of tip income from Casa Lupita? Do you recognize your name on it?
Yes, and that's my signature.
And this is for the period through March 12th, 1989, is that correct?
I didn't see a date. Yes.
Can you go through, starting in March, and ask you, do you see a document marked March 1st, 1989?
Correct.
And does it appear you were working that day?
Yes.
And would you turn the page and look at March 2nd, 1989?
Mhm.
Does it appear you're working March 2nd?
Correct.
And would you look at March 3rd?
don't see my name here. Oh, here.
Did you see your name?
Yes,
So you're working March 3rd.
correct.
Would you look at March 4th?
Mhm.
Are you working that day?
Yes,
Would you look at March 5th?
Mhm.
March 6th?
Mhm.
Is that yes?
yes, it is.
March 7th?
I worked a lot.
Mhm.
Yes,
March 8th? I believe that you're off that day. Do you see your name?
no, I do not.
Okay, would you look at March 9th?
It's there.
March 10th? I believe you're off that day. But would you double check and see if you see your name?
Yeah, the witness is clear. Did the witness answer with respect to whether she saw her name on March 9th?
She did. I believe, is that correct?
Let me go see. Yes, it is there, March 9th.
March 10th, I believe you're off. Would you look at March 11th?
Yes,
What about it?
yes, I am working there.
March 12th?
Yes, I'm there.
March 13th?
Is there more records?
Excuse me? She asked
I,
if there were
if
more.
there are more, they're stopped on the 12th.
Put these back. Okay. Is this your tip reporting sheet ending March 26th?
Yes,
Okay. These are documents similar to those you previously reviewed.
Okay.
Okay, would you look at, we left at March 12th, you were working. Would you look at March 13th?
yes,
Okay, and March 14th
yes,
and March 15th
yes,
and March 16th
yes,
and March 17th, I believe you had off. Would you look and just see, double check if your name is there?
I do not see it.
March 18th,
Yes,
March 19th, I believe you're off. Would you look at March 20th,
yes,
March 21st?
Okay, again, are you trying to establish something when she says yes?
Yes, you're working that
Yes.
day, I take it?
yes.
Would you look at the 22nd,
What date was that I just looked at? The 21st? Okay.
21st? I believe you're off the 22nd, 23rd, if you would look at those.
Correct,
24th,
correct,
25th.
What's the 24th and 25th?
These are days she's off.
correct.
And the 26th, you're off. Is that correct?
Yes, I do not see my name.
Okay. Could you hand me those? The next group of documents I'm handing you start out with the tip receipts for the period up to April 9th. Is that correct?
Correct,
Okay. And these records begin March 27th. Is that correct?
yes,
And I believe you're off that day. Is that right?
correct.
And 28th, are you working?
Well, it has my name scratched out, the hour scratched out, so I do not know.
Okay. 29th,
Yes,
30th, I believe you're off. that correct?
Yes.
And the 31st, I believe you're working, is that correct?
Yes.
Turning to April 1st. The 1st, are you working?
Yes.
And the 2nd?
You have my name highlighted, but there's no check mark here, so I do not know.
So your name is listed there as working.
Yes, but there's no check mark.
So that's a question mark. The second,
As a matter of
are you
fact, it says out right here.
working? And the 3rd, are you working?
Yes.
4th, I believe you're off.
Yes, it looks that way.
And the 5th, are you working?
Yes.
And the 6th, are you off?
I do not see my name.
The 7th, are you working?
Yes.
And the 8th?
Correct.
And the 9th?
Yes.
And the 10th? We need another. Does this package begin with another tip statement with your name on it?
Yes, it does.
And do these documents begin on the 10th of April?
Correct.
And were you working on the 10th of April?
Yes.
And the 11th?
Has a question mark here.
The 12th?
Yes.
13th and 14th, I believe you're off. Would you look at those to make sure?
I don't see my name here.
Here being the 13th
Correct.
and the 14th,
I do not see my name on the 14th either.
the 15th,
Yes.
16th,
Yes.
17th,
Yes.
18th,
Yes.
19th,
Yes.
20th,
Yes.
21st,
Yes.
22nd,
Yes.
23rd,
Yes.
24th,
I'm done here.
so I'm going to send you the next package.
Is that the same as number? Is this going to be the same as 367?
This is good, Your Honor. These records appear to begin on April 24th.
Correct.
That's correct?
Yes.
And were you working on the 24th
Yes.
and the 25th?
Yes.
And the 26th?
Yes.
27th, I believe you were off. Did you look and make sure?
I don't see my name on the 27th.
Okay. 28th,
Yes.
the 29th?
Is the 28th is working or not?
Yes.
Yes.
And the 30th?
Yes. No, it does not have a check mark here, so I do not know.
So your name is highlighted, but
Name
there's
is-
no check mark, so that's a questionable.
Correct.
Now, Ms. Pisarcik, if you would look at the calendar I've been marking as you went along,
Mhm.
which is dated March of '89,
Correct.
does it appear that there's only one period in March in which you were not working for a period of time over a weekend?
Yes, there does. Well, there's several here.
So if the weekends in March, the Saturdays in March were March 4th, 11th, and 18th were the first 3 Saturdays, you were working those days,
Yes, I
is
was.
that correct?
Yes,
And the only Saturday you were not working was the 25th of March, is that correct?
correct.
So the only period that would have been available in this entire 2-month period for a trip of more than 2 days to California would have been the period of the 22nd through the 27th of March. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And this restaurant we're talking about is in New Jersey.
Yes,
Is that correct? Now, looking at that, would it be your assumption then that your trip to California was during the 22nd through the 27th of March?
Calls for a conclusion on part of the witness.
Sustained.
Was it fair to say, Ms. Pisarcik, that that is the only period in which you are not working in New Jersey
during that month.
during the period of March and April?
On the weekend, yes.
Well, for more than 2 days at a time.
No. There's a period in April as well. There's a 2-day period in April as well.
No, what I'm saying is for more than 2 days
Oh, correct.
and over a weekend.
Yes.
Now, is it your testimony that during the time that you were visiting and you heard this
Can you move forward?
conversation, it was a time in which Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were there for at least part of the time? Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you restate that?
Yes. The time when you say you had this conversation with Eric was
Correct.
a time in which Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were there at least part of the time,
Yes,
and it's a time when Eric was there.
correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, when you talked to the police about this incident, you told them that you remembered it being a situation where Mrs. Menendez was saying something and that had triggered Eric's comment. Do you remember telling the police that?
That she had said something?
Yes.
No, I do not recall saying that.
Did I ask you at the break, or did Mrs. Pisarcik and I at the break ask you to read over the report that Detective Zoller had written regarding your interview with them on this subject?
Yes.
And did I ask you to make any corrections that you thought were appropriate?
Yes.
So in the report, if I tell you, it says that you were at the house in Beverly Hills and when Eric overheard Mrs. Menendez talking about the hairpiece. Would that be correct or not?
I do not recall seeing, I'm sorry, I do not recall seeing that in the report that you asked me to read.
Okay, I asked you a half hour ago, right?
Right.
And I asked you to review a report that's 1.5 pages long?
Yes.
And that particular section is even highlighted. Is that correct? And
I don't know, I
it
don't have it in
says
front of me.
that you were at the house in Beverly Hills when Eric overheard their mother talking about the hairpiece. She remembers that Eric laughed and said, "I can't believe it. That's why his hair is never out of place."
I do not remember that as being true. I remember saying that that is what Eric told me. I did not.
Okay, so you were interviewed November 2nd, 1993 by Detective Zoller.
Right.
And was anybody with him when you were interviewed by him?
By Lieutenant Zoller? It was
Yes.
Lieutenant Zoller.
And he wrote this report I've just read to you.
Correct.
And I asked you to read the report and tell me if anything in it was wrong. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you did not correct that.
I did not remember seeing that, no.
Okay. And so you're saying now you never told Detective Zoller that this conversation came about when Eric overheard his mother making a comment?
I don't remember telling Detective Zoller that it was because Eric overheard his mother.
So Detective Zoller would be lying in this report then?
Objection, argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained.
When you read through this report in the hall,
Correct.
there was nothing about it that seemed inconsistent to you about given what you had testified to?
I do not remember that part being in that. I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, so you're saying you never told Detective Zoller that this conversation came up in a situation in which Mrs. Menendez was involved in the conversation?
I remember telling Detective Zoller that I had the conversation with Eric.
But you didn't tell him anything about overhearing
I don't recall that, no.
Mrs. Menendez?
No, I do not.
And that is not how it happened, right?
I do not recall that, no. I just recall having the conversation with Eric, having Eric.
Okay,
Bring it
I
up.
guess my question of you is, do you believe that what Detective Zoller wrote down from an interview with you less than a month ago
Mhm.
is the more accurate version, or the version you're giving here today is the more accurate version?
Objection, argumentative response.
Sustained.
Let me do this. Thank you very much. Were you ever present at the Beverly Hills house when Mrs. Menendez's car was stolen?
I do not remember.
Would you remember if a car was stolen?
I don't know. I mean, it was my car, I remember.
Okay, and if it was, you were staying in the house and Mrs. Menendez's car was stolen, do you think that would be something that you would remember?
It might be.
And if I told you that Mrs. Menendez's car was stolen on March 24th, which is the only weekend in that 2-month period you weren't working, does that suggest to you that maybe you weren't there that weekend?
I don't recall her car being stolen on any specific day, if that's what you're
Do
asking
you
me.
ever remember her car being stolen?
It could have been stolen.
But you don't remember,
No, I do not.
but it's possible. You'd be willing to say that it could have happened and you could have known about it. Is that right?
Objection, argumentative debate.
Sustained.
Do you know what the Easter Bowl is?
Yes,
What's the Easter Bowl?
it is a tennis tournament
And where is it held?
in Florida.
And is it held every year?
Yes.
And how long does it last?
I've never played in the tournament, so I don't know.
Are tournaments usually one-day things?
Objection, irrelevant.
Overruled.
Do tournaments usually last more than one day?
2 days and up to 2 weeks.
And you don't know anything about the Easter Bowl?
I've never played in the tournament.
Do you know when it's generally held?
At Easter?
You know that in 1989, the Easter Bowl took place over the weekend of the. This is it. You know that the Easter Bowl in 1989 was played from March 17th to March 25th. Do you know that?
No.
Excuse me, Honor, it seems facts not in evidence and false hearsay.
Overruled, the answer will stand.
Do you know that Eric Menendez played in the Easter Bowl
I know
that year?
No, I don't recall. I mean, Eric played a lot of tennis tournaments.
Okay. And do you know that Mr. and Mrs. Menendez accompanied him to the Easter Bowl in Miami,
I'm sure they probably did.
March 17th and March 25th?
Objection, it seems facts not in evidence as to the time period.
Sustained.
If Eric Menendez was at the Easter Bowl March 17th to March 25th, does it seem unlikely that he was home for the conversation you've related?
Well,
Objection, it seems facts not in evidence as improper hypothetical.
Overruled.
I have not stated that I had the conversation with Eric on that weekend that you are alluding to.
Well, you said it was either March or April. Is that correct?
It could have been late February. I do not remember exactly when that conversation was.
Okay, so before it was spring or summer, and now it could be February?
Objection, argumentative.
Overruled.
Now it could be February?
I cannot remember the exact date of that conversation.
Well, when you say, do you think of February as spring or summer?
I would consider February early spring.
In New Jersey? You were working at Casa Lupita in February also, weren't you?
Correct.
When in February do you think this might have been?
I do not know.
And if I show you were working every weekend in February, would you then move back to January?
I don't recall the exact time of this conversation. I think I've stated that.
But you did say spring or summer of '89.
Correct.
If I show you were working every weekend in February, will you then go back to January?
Objection, argumentative.
Overall.
I cannot give you the exact date of the conversation.
My question, Ms. Pisarcik, is if I prove to you were working every weekend in February,
Mhm.
will you then go back to January for when this conversation took place?
It could have been. I do
It
not
could have been
recall.
January.
It could have been. I remember the conversation is what I
I see.
stated.
And if I prove to you that you weren't there in January, will you then go back to December of '88?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
How did you happen to come up with the spring or summer designation for this conversation?
That's when I thought that it had occurred.
Let's see. When you were interviewed by the prosecution in November,
This
I believe
November?
the conversation was tape recorded, is that correct?
This November?
Yes.
No, it was not.
I'm sorry, last November.
Last November.
So about 1992.
I'm not sure what year we're in. Was it
Yes.
tape recorded?
Yes.
And did you ever get a chance to look at that transcript?
Yes, I did.
And did you review it to see if it was accurate?
Yes.
And one of the things that you were asked about was the use of a phone card.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
Correct.
And the prosecution was very interested because there were,
I would object to this characterization of the prosecution's interest.
Objection sustained.
sorry, I'll
Rephrase
rephrase
the
it.
question.
The prosecution asked you about the use of the phone card because a call had been made the night that Mr. and Mrs. Menendez died. Is that correct?
Yeah, object to the form of the question as assuming facts not in evidence and argumentative.
Sustained. Rephrase the question. Answer stricken.
What do you remember being asked
I
about the use of the phone card?
remember being asked if I was given permission to use that card at any time.
Now, when do you believe that you broke up with Lyle Menendez prior to the death of his parents?
I believe it was in April, late April.
Did Lyle Menendez do something special for you on Valentine's Day that year with regard to the dorm room the two of you were living in?
I never lived in a dorm room with Lyle Menendez.
He didn't decorate the dorm room for you?
I don't recall.
Do you remember having an argument with him with regard to him having sent flowers to a former girlfriend named Stacy?
No.
And do you remember telling the police and the prosecution that you split up with Lyle Menendez because you had had an argument with the roommate you had at the time, Donovan Goudreau,
Mm-hmm.
and then Lyle pursued the friendship with Donovan Goudreau, and you were upset about him not taking your side, something like that?
Your objection, this is hearsay, and it's just testing your memory.
Overall.
Please restate that.
Why did you and Lyle Menendez break up in the spring of '89?
Well, we had been engaged at the time, and one of the reasons was because I had lived with Donovan Goodrow, and Donovan had, or some money had disappeared from my apartment, and I just did not feel comfortable living with him at the time. That was one of the reasons.
Okay, so is it fair to say that after you and Lyle Menendez split up, then Lyle Menendez and Donovan became very good friends?
Yes, they were friends at the same time during our relationship as well.
Okay. And were you still involved with Lyle Menendez when he took a trip to California with Donovan, or was that after your split up?
I don't recall.
You don't remember? If you were going with him and he was gone for, say, a week to California, do you think you might remember?
It was a long time ago.
So you don't remember?
I don't recall that instance.
Do you remember Donovan moving into the dorm room with him?
I do. Yeah, I remember because I kicked Donovan out of our apartment.
Okay. And do you remember when Donovan left Lyle's dorm room,
No, I do
when
not.
he was thrown out of there?
No, I do not. Not exactly.
Do you remember how long Lyle Menendez and Donovan Goodrow spent time together and Donovan lived in his dorm room?
No.
Would it be fair to say that you were not really involved with Lyle Menendez during the period of time that he and Donovan were very close?
There was a part of when we were not, yes.
Okay. How much of a part? How long?
I don't remember exactly. I mean, Lyle and I broke up in, as I said, late April, so approximately that time.
Have you followed this case much?
No,
Do you watch it on television?
I try not to.
Do people tell you what is being said, however?
Not really. I don't listen. It's not a topic of conversation.
So no one tells you anything about the testimony in this case? Is that your testimony?
People have mentioned things, but, newspaper, TV, but I don't follow it.
When you say newspaper and TV, is that you read the newspaper and watch the TV, or people tell you about what's in the newspaper, what's on the TV?
Well, I read the papers and I watch the news and, I don't.
So you have an idea of what's been going on in the case as it's reported in the newspaper and
Correct.
on the news. Is that true?
Correct.
And when you were interviewed by the police, they asked you something about the use of the Menendez family phone card. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, it is.
And what specifically did they ask you about it?
I believe, if I remember correctly, they asked me if I had permission to use it or if I had ever used the family phone card before.
Okay. And why did they ask you that? Did they explain it to you?
Objection, calls for speculation and hearsay.
Objection sustained.
Was it directed at calls that were made particularly around the death of the parents?
Yes.
And did you have permission to use that phone card?
Yes, I did.
Who gave it to you?
Lyle gave it to not only myself, but to my sisters, and Lyle's mother also had given it to me the week prior because we had talked, and I was calling her often and calling for the tennis tournament that Lyle was supposed to come to.
Okay, now this is August of '89, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, is it your testimony that you spoke to Lyle Menendez personally about being in that tournament?
Yes.
And do you remember telling the police a year ago when you were interviewed that all of your arrangements had been with Mrs. Menendez?
Well, Lyle and I had discussed going to the tournament together, obviously, or he wouldn't have even known about the tennis tournament.
How do you know he knew about it?
Well, we had planned on going to the tennis tournament.
When had you made those arrangements?
I don't recall exactly. Lyle and I had, as I said before, seen each other several times during the summer.
When did you see him?
Several times during the summer.
What months?
I don't recall exactly which months.
Where did you see him?
I was living in Lawrenceville, New Jersey.
So he would come back there and see you?
Yes.
Were you two going together at the time?
No, we were just friendly at the time.
How many times did he see you?
I don't recall exactly.
Did anybody else see you that summer?
I don't recall.
So would he come
I'm
into
assuming.
your workplace, or
Yeah.
would you go out with friends?
Yeah, he came to the Casa Lupita a couple times.
So other people would have seen him there seeing you, is that correct?
There's been cause for speculation.
Sustained.
Now, when you told the prosecution that you made the arrangements with Mrs. Menendez, this was over a year ago, is that correct?
Checking vague as to what was over a year ago.
Rephrase the question.
The interview with the prosecution that we've
Yeah.
talked about, the taped interview, was over a year ago, is that correct?
Yes, it was.
And in that taped interview, you talked about having made the arrangements with Mrs. Menendez, is that correct?
Well, Mrs. Menendez and I had talked about the tennis tournament. Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
And you told them Mrs. Menendez had given you permission to use the phone credit card to arrange this tennis tournament for you and Lyle to play in together, is that correct?
Correct.
And did Mrs. Menendez, was she sort of trying to help you two get back together?
There's been cause for speculation.
Sustained.
Did you, in your conversations with Mrs. Menendez, talk about this would be a good way for you and Lyle to get back together, and that was something she was interested in seeing happen?
I don't recall.
So you think she might have? She might have said, you know, we really would like to see Lyle going with you, and so I'm going to help you set this up.
I
There's been
don't.
cause for speculation, Your Honor.
Sustained to the form of the question.
Since this case this trial has begun, you are now aware, aren't you, of how Mrs. Menendez felt about you?
Your Honor, I'd object to the question as lack of foundation.
Sustained.
Are you aware of the things Mrs. Menendez said about you
I know how Mrs. Menendez felt about me.
from things you've learned while this trial has progressed?
No.
When did Mrs. Menendez give you permission to use the phone card?
At that time, she had, around when we were setting up the tennis tournament.
Which was when?
Well, the tournament was that last weekend in August, I believe. So prior to that,
How much prior to that?
I don't recall.
A couple days, a couple weeks?
Well, usually tournament entries are several weeks before, so at least several weeks, if not more.
And she gave you permission to use that card so that you could set up his involvement in the tennis tournament. Is that correct?
Yes,
And Lyle didn't show up at the tennis tournament. Is that correct?
correct.
And did you call him and say, what's going on? Why aren't you here?
No, the tournament director informed me that he never received an entry.
But when Lyle didn't, had you talked about where you were going to stay or when he was going to arrive? Anything like that?
No,
So
we were
you
just friends at the time.
But you
Yeah.
were arranging, his mother had given you permission to use the long distance calling card so that you could arrange for Lyle to be in the tennis tournament, right?
Mhm.
Yes?
Yes,
And you and Lyle had talked about you being in that tennis tournament, right?
occasionally, yes.
And had you talked about where he was going to stay or when he was going to arrive?
I don't recall.
And when the tournament started, how many days long was this tournament?
It was the weekend. Saturday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Okay. And your best recollection is you arrived when?
I believe I stated before Friday.
And when you got there on Friday and he wasn't there, did you call and say, what's going on?
I don't remember.
You would have used the credit card to do it, wouldn't you?
I don't remember. Not necessarily.
Did you call him on Saturday and say, why aren't you here?
No, I was playing a tennis tournament at the time.
Did you call him on Sunday and say what happened, that you didn't show up?
His name was never entered in the tennis tournament.
But you had talked to him about going, correct?
Mhm.
And you never called him to say, why didn't you show up?
Well, it was not stated as definite that he would show up. He expressed some interest in coming to the tennis tournament
When did he express some interest in coming to the tennis tournament?
at some time during the summer when I mentioned I was going to the tennis tournament.
And you said he had given you permission to use the credit card, is that correct?
Correct.
When had he given you permission to use the
Oh,
credit card?
Probably a year prior.
Okay. And during
could
the
have
time
been
that
longer.
during the time that you weren't going with him, I take it you didn't use the credit card then. It was just because of this tournament. Is that correct?
I don't recall ever using it unless Lyle gave me the permission to use it.
Okay, but what I'm talking about is during the period that you weren't going with him.
Well, I may have if he called me and if we had talked during the summer,
But would you have used it just to call friends or call your family or something?
Well,
that
he
was
gave
unrelated?
us,
Excuse me, objection, this line questions are relevant.
Overall,
You may answer.
he gave that card to both myself, my sister, and my sisters, to say, you know, if you want to call your mom, my mom. He just used it very casually.
Did he use the credit card all the time himself?
Yes,
Did he always use it to make phone calls?
yes,
Even local phone calls?
yes. I remember that.
But you said that you believe that you broke up with him sometime in May of '89,
I think I said the last.
at least May, maybe
Least
even
April.
earlier,
Mhm.
possibly April.
Could have been, yes.
Okay. And my question of you is, after you broke up with him, did you continue to use the phone credit card?
I do not remember.
Would it assist you to look at phone records? May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I believe that you indicated that you had permission to use this credit card from Mrs. Menendez to arrange the tennis tournament
Yes,
for Lyle.
correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And so who would you have needed to call to arrange that?
Tournament directors, herself,
Where
You know.
would the tournament directors have been?
probably in Vermont. That's where the tennis tournament was.
Okay. And she was in California.
Mhm.
So you would have had permission to call numbers in Vermont and numbers in California.
Objection, Mr.
that correct?
Addresses the testimony.
overall.
I believe that would be correct. Yes.
You know, I'd like to mark for identification. At this point, our next number is
368.
Ms. Pisarcik, I'd like you to take a look at the records for August, starting August 18th, 1989.
Mhm.
And I've highlighted certain numbers in yellow, is that correct?
Yes, you have.
And would you take a look at those phone numbers and tell me if you recognize, I believe these records have the date, the time called, the city called, and the phone number, and in some cases, the person who's called,
Mhm.
and in some cases, the number from which it originated.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Mhm.
And would you start at the top of the list? We're just dealing with August 18th now.
Okay.
Do you recognize this phone number in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania?
No. No. it's not
What about the numbers in Georgia?
No.
What about Huntington, West Virginia?
I don't recognize that, but I recognize the name.
And who is this person?
That person was a friend of my sister's,
And what's that person's name?
Ike Gross.
Now, this is the number that these phone calls are made from. Do you
Okay.
recognize this number?
That would be my sister's phone number.
Okay, so we have on the 18th of August, 1, 2, 3 calls at least that she's made on that phone credit card. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Moving down, do you recognize any of the numbers?
No.
Either, would you look at both the number called,
Mhm.
person called, or where the call came from and tell me if you recognize any of those?
No, I do not.
Okay, what about this call from Vermont to someone named Jim in Trenton?
I don't recall. It doesn't ring a bell.
Yep,
Okay.
speak up.
It does not ring a bell. I mean, it does not look familiar.
On the 19th, we have another call from, to the same person you've identified before as a friend of your sister's. Is that correct?
This person right here?
Yes, Ike Groce,
Gross, yes.
Gross.
Correct.
Okay. And we have another 2 calls to someone named Jim.
Okay.
We have a couple calls to Vermont. Is that
Okay.
correct?
Yes.
And then we have a call to James E. Pisarcik. Who is that?
That's my father.
That was on the 19th.
Mhm.
Do you have any connection to the tennis tournament?
What is this number right here? Is that where it was from?
Yes.
That would be from my sister.
And on the 20th, we have some calls to Stillwater, Oklahoma.
Mhm.
Is that yes?
Yes, it is.
And do you recognize the numbers that, and we have another call to your father, is that correct?
Correct.
And who's making those calls?
Those would, our Birmingham, Alabama would be one sister, and that is the other sister.
So your sisters were using the phone?
Yes, I told you Lyle gave them permission to do that.
Okay, even during the time you were broken up? You
I-
didn't call them after you broke up and said, look, Lyle and I have split up. We split up in April or May, and now it's August. You shouldn't be using the credit card?
I don't believe if I would have, that would have been a topic of conversation.
Okay. What was your phone number at the time? Where were you living?
What date is this?
August of 89.
August of 89, I would have been in Lawrenceville.
And do you remember what your phone number was?
No, I do not.
Okay, would you look at the entries now for August 16th?
Mhm.
And can you tell me whether you recognize any of these numbers again?
Well, just the numbers that you had pointed out before.
More calls by your sister. We have a call to someone named Richard Garrett. Who's Richard Garrett?
Rich Garrett, from Birmingham.
Who's Richard Garrett?
I don't remember. I don't know.
Richard Garrett was your roommate when you were attending Mercer College. Can
Oh.
you remember that?
Rick, yes.
That Richard Garrett.
Okay, yes. Yes, he was a roommate.
Yes. And what about Everett Miller?
Nope. Does not look familiar.
What about the number that it's called from?
Well, Huntington, West Virginia is where my sister attended school.
Okay. So we have the call to Rick Garrett for 17 minutes. We have the call to Everett Miller from your sister for 25 minutes. These are all on the 16th of August. We have the call to James Pisarcik. I take it that's your father
Yes,
for
it is.
15 minutes
From Mercerville.
from Mercerville. Is this
Okay.
your number?
Again, I don't know the exact number what it was.
Did you use this card to call your father?
As I said, Lyle gave me the permission to use the card.
We're in August of 89. Did
Correct.
you use the card to call your father?
I could have.
And was that part of arranging the tournament?
It's argumentative, Your Honor.
Overall, your answer?
It could have been. I do not recall.
Your father was involved in the tournament
No.
in Vermont?
No.
And on the 17th of August now, we have another call to Ike Gross, which I think you said is your sister's.
Mhm.
We have another call to Richard Garrett, which is the Rick Garrett, you remember. We have another call to your father on the 17th.
From
that
Huntington, West Virginia, yes.
Excuse me, the last call of the father, where was that from?
West Virginia, her sister. And we have on the 14th of August, another call to Richard Garrett, is that correct?
Yes.
And on the 15th, another call to Richard Garrett, is that correct?
Mhm. From
And,
Birmingham, Alabama, yes.
and a second call that day to Richard Garrett,
Okay.
and a third call that day to Richard Garrett. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we have a number of other calls to Bethel Park.
Mhm.
Who's in Bethel Park?
Bethel Park does not look, I do not know.
Well, has your
that
father's
phone
name
number.
listed next
Yes.
to it? Does that help?
Yes. We just not live in Bethel Park, though.
Okay, but these records show his phone number with.
Yeah,
Bethel
that is the
Park.
correct number. That is actually not my father's number. That is my mother's number.
Okay. And so this is on the 16th of August, there's a call to Bethel Park, your
Mhm.
mother's number, is that correct?
Correct.
And on the 11th of August, there's another call to Bethel Park. Some
Mhm.
more calls to Birmingham. More calls to your mother's.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And we have on the 13th, an 8-minute call, a 27-minute call, and a 14-minute call to your mother's phone number. Is that correct?
Correct. And those are from Birmingham.
And that's one of your sisters?
Correct.
And we have on the 10th, another call to Richard Garrett. Who works at Horn's department store?
My mother does.
And how long is that phone call?
9 minutes.
We have an additional number of calls. If I suggest to you that the yellow highlighting in here represents phone calls made by you or your family,
Mhm.
which date back to June,
Correct.
is it your testimony you had permission in June to use the family credit card to make these phone calls?
Objection irrelevant as to what her family members did.
Overall.
Is it your testimony that you and your family members had the right to make sometimes as many as 11 long-distance phone calls a day to other family members on the Menendez phone card?
All I know is Lyle had given that card out, the number out. I did not know, nor I'm sure my family did not know that it was a Menendez family phone card.
Who did they think was paying the bill?
Objection, excuse me, that assumes that's not ever called for your saying for any matter.
Sustained as a form of function.
You indicated that neither you nor any of your family members knew this was the Menendez family phone card. Is that correct?
Lyle
Objection irrelevant as to what her family members say the language wrong.
Overall.
simply gave that card number to my family, my sisters, and myself, and said that it was fine to use the card.
Who did you think paid the bill?
I don't know.
Did you contact Lyle at the end of every month or Mrs. Menendez and say, gee, would you look over the phone bill and tell us which?
Oh, paying the bill.
Did you ever pay for any of those phone calls?
I was never billed for those phone calls.
Did you ever talk to the parents about the fact that you were using the card, that your sisters were using the card?
Well, as I said, Mrs. Menendez had given me permission to use the card.
But I believe you told us, and you told the police a year ago, that Mrs. Menendez gave you permission to use this card so that you could arrange for you and Lyle to play together in a tournament in Vermont at the end of August. Is that correct?
Correct.
And when you were interviewed by the police, you didn't say, Lyle told me and anybody I knew to go ahead and use the card for as long as I wanted.
I was not asked that question.
You were asked about having the card and who gave you permission. Do you remember that?
She had permission.
Page 17. Starting on line 11, just for reference, Mrs. Bazanich says, are you talking about the phone call? Then moving down to line 20, your explanation is, prior to that, about a week or even 2 weeks before, Lyle was supposed to come to the tennis tournament that I was in Vermont that weekend. Question, are you talking about the weekend of the murders? Answer, yes. Question, okay, so you were in Vermont that weekend? Answer, yes. Question, at a tennis tournament? And Lyle had previously, and Lyle, comma, you had previously arranged that he would fly there. Answer, well, I had talked to his mom about it, and she was supposed to set everything up. I had sent her an entry blank for him, for her to forward onto the tournament director and, set up his play in the tournament. And I talked to him several times about it, playing in it, and was under the assumption that he was going to be there that weekend. Mrs. Menendez, well, I thought about this after we talked. Question, when I came to your house, meaning when the police came to your house?
Correct.
Answer, at the door. Question, Answer, that she had given me permission to use the phone card to call her and make plans and all that kind of stuff regarding the tournament. And then when I got to the tournament in Vermont, he wasn't there. Question, were you surprised? Answer, yeah, I was kind of expecting him to be there. Question, yeah, well, did you call him from Vermont? Answer, no. Now, I believe what you were talking about there was the police showed up at your door rather unexpectedly one time and asked you about a phone call that was made the night the parents died. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the next time that you were interviewed by the police was sometime later. Is that correct?
About a year, yes.
Okay. And so when you are interviewed by them about a year later, you say to them, well, I've thought about what you asked me about the credit card. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct.
Okay. Well, tell me what's correct.
I believe I corrected that statement. They had shown up at my door, and then I was questioned shortly after that.
How much after that?
Several weeks, I would imagine.
Okay.
I could have been days. I don't remember exactly.
All right. So when you are questioned by them several days or weeks later, you bring this up and say that you've thought about their question about you using the credit card. Is that correct?
Well, they had asked me about it.
And they had asked you specifically with reference to calls that were made the night that the parents died. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you at that time told them that Mrs. Menendez had given you permission to use the credit card a week or 2 weeks before to set up the tournament.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
You didn't say, Lyle told me and all my family members we could use it anytime we wanted, did you? Yes
No.
or no?
No.
Your Honor, could we break at this point?
All right, it's 10 to 5, and we'll take our recess until tomorrow morning. How much longer do you think your cross will be?
I'd say at least an hour.
Okay, we'll see everybody back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Both juries tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. Don't permit yourselves to be exposed to anything about this case outside of the courtroom. We'll see everybody back here tomorrow at 9. And I'll ask that the bailiffs inform me as soon as our jurors arrive so that we can start with them. But while we're waiting for the jurors, we can discuss matters relating to other witnesses or this witness if there are any matters the council wants to discuss. Are there?
Your Honor, I believe the defense has objections to the testimony of Brian Anderson and some objections to certain portions of Ms. Eisenberg. So I can go through Mr. Anderson and show the court the things I'm not going to use. I think I marked them on the new copy, some of them, but I thought that would help to. I told the defense some of them. Does the court have a copy, the new annotated copy of the notes?
Yes.
Page 24.
Just wait a second, Your Honor, we're saving.
Well, before we get to Mr. Anderson, I assume there are no matters that require a hearing outside the jury's presence in relationship to the testimony of the current witness. Is that right? All right. All right, page 24.
Yeah, Your Honor, the last thing I have highlighted there about the will, and defense found willing to tell us I'm not going to use. Did I write not use on your copy?
Yes.
And then page 27, the last line that's highlighted, I'm not going to use, not a secret. Okay.
All
And
right.
then page 28, the third highlighted from the bottom, parents told Lyle he would be cut off, I'm not going to use. And then also the part in the paragraph that starts straw that broke the camel's back, the credit card without authorization, the without authorization part, I can't prove independently, so I'm not going to use the without authorization portion. And then on the new notes from yesterday, the second page, the portion about the $5 million policy on the second page. I'm not going to use.
Can I inquire, counsel, Mr. Possession, you plan to use everything on the set of notes and everything?
Yes.
So you can hide it. Okay.
All right, so the $5 million policy, and then the last page I'm not going to use.
Can I inquire of Councilman, Susanna, could you tell us if you weren't going to use the, why the candidate trip was canceled for? Roger said it's too convoluted a tale.
Yeah, I'm not going to use that either.
All right, both juries are here, so have you now gone through all those things that you won't be using?
Yes, everything's done. So that may shortcut the objection.
All right, since we have the jury, both juries here will now, unless there's some reason not to, that the council want to articulate, we'll proceed.
Okay, one other thing, Mr. I think I told the court this, but I'm not sure if I did. Mr. Anderson has to leave tomorrow, trying to get a Navy flight out of LAX.
Right.
We have a flight back for him on Sunday. If we need to come back Monday, we can discuss tomorrow.
All right, then let's have the witness come in and the juries come in as well, and we'll proceed. And we're now ready to proceed with the cross-examination of the witness. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right, would the witness get back on the witness stand, please? Would you state your name again for the record?
Jamie Lee Pisarcik.
I'll remind you that you're still under oath.
Sir.
Can I inquire what number the calendars? 369?
That'll be the next number.
No, this is the one from yesterday. Did we mark it?
We didn't mark it.
Okay. Could I mark it this time 369?
All right, 369.
And this is, for the record, this is the calendar on which I was making check marks while Ms. Pisarcik was testifying about her employment records. And with the court's permission, we will double check it against the transcript and put in a corrected version if there are any dates that are incorrect.
Right.
May I approach?
Yes.
Ms. Pisarcik, yesterday I believe you were testifying about the dates in which you were working at the restaurant in Princeton. Do you recall that?
Correct.
And I'm going to, we've marked this as 369, and I'm going to put it up on the board. And yesterday I was making red check marks as you were indicating that those were days you were working. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this shows March and April of 1989?
Yes, it does.
Correct?
Yes.
And I believe that you had indicated, based on your work records, that the only significant block of time that you had where you were not working at the restaurant was the period from March 22nd to March 27th. Do you remember that?
That's the way it appears, yes.
Okay. And do you remember we talked about the Easter Bowl? Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes.
And I'd indicated to you that you said that you believed that Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were there for part of the time, and certainly Eric had to have been there,
Correct.
correct? And I think we had indicated that they were in Florida from the 17th of March until the 24th of March. So I'm going to just draw a pink line through those dates.
You know, I would object to assuming facts not in evidence.
Sustained
What?
as to the form of the question or the statement actually
Okay.
by counsel.
Assuming that we have records which show that that Eric and Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were in Florida for the dates the 17th through the 24th, that would take that period of time out. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And assuming that we had records showing Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were in New York starting on the 27th of March, that would take out that day. Is that correct?
Objection, argumentative, this is facts not in evidence.
Well, with understanding the question just asked that these assumptions be made at this point. They are just assumptions without having been proven anyway.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. And You said you have no memory of Mrs. Menendez's car being stolen. Is that correct?
I do not remember her car being stolen.
And assuming that records show that her car was stolen on the 25th of March, and then I will use a red marker for that purpose, that we take out that Saturday. Is that correct?
What do you mean by taking it out?
Well, in terms of a day when she was there. If she doesn't remember the car being stolen, if the car was stolen on the 25th.
What are you asking? Are you asking a question of the witness? If he
Yes.
doesn't remember it, what does it prove?
Yes. What I'm asking you is, do you remember Mrs. Menendez's car being stolen?
I believe yesterday I stated that it could have been stolen, but it's nothing that comes to my memory.
Okay, you don't
No.
remember it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just indicating the red line is the date that the car was stolen. Is that correct? And I believe your testimony yesterday was you thought that this possible period in time when you could have visited from the 22nd through the 27th was spring break for Princeton. Do you remember that?
I do not remember. I remember stating that it could have been. I do not recall when Princeton spring break was.
Well, if I indicate to you that records show that spring break was from March 11th to March 19th, that would have been a week in which you were working. You worked the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, and 18th of that week. Is that correct?
That's what it appears.
And are you aware of the fact that Donovan Boudreaux came to California with Lyle Menendez for spring break that year?
I do remember Lyle and Donovan taking a trip together. Yes, I do remember. I do
Yeah.
not recall when that trip was.
And do you remember that Donovan testified that this was after you and Lyle Menendez had broken up?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Foundation.
Objection sustained.
Have you watched this trial at all?
Objection is Vegas to watch it where?
Overall. Okay, you've clarified it on television.
I have seen bits and pieces of it.
Okay. And people also gave you information about some of the testimony, is that correct?
I don't understand what you mean by information.
Did anybody ever talk to you about things that were testified to or evidence that was produced in this trial?
Most of my friends know that I don't care to discuss the trial with anybody, so
Okay, but my question is, does anybody give you any information?
no,
So you've only watched it occasionally, yes?
correct.
How many times have you watched it?
I do not know.
Did you watch Lyle Menendez's testimony?
No, I did not.
And did anybody give you any information about Lyle Menendez's testimony?
I guess I don't understand what you mean by
Did
information.
anybody talk to you about what it was he testified to?
No,
So you have absolutely no information about what he testified to in this trial?
I believe I stated yesterday that when I've read the newspapers and seen an occasional newscast, that is, but I don't remember any specifics as far as what I have seen and what I have not.
Okay. You don't remember any specifics about Donovan Boudreaux's testimony? Do
No, I do not.
you remember any specifics about a young woman named Christy Duran, whom Lyle met when he came out to California with Donovan?
I know that Lyle did date Christy, but I don't remember any testimony
And
regarding.
was that after you split up?
I
Was
would
what after they split up?
That he dated Christy Duran?
I would assume so.
Here, we just like a speculation.
Sustained, the answer is correct.
How did you know he dated Christy?
He told me about her.
And when he told you about her, was this something that he was confessing he had dated somebody else while you were together, or was this something that had happened when you were no longer together?
I believe he asked me who I had dated during that summer, and we had a conversation, and I asked him, it's that type of conversation.
Okay, so it was about people you dated after you split up, is that correct?
I believe so.
May I approach again, Your Honor, with the phone records, which I think yesterday we marked as 368?
Yes.
Mr. Pisarcik, I'm asking you to look at the same phone records you reviewed yesterday. And do you see Christy's name listed here?
Yes, I do.
And can you see the dates on which her name starts appearing? And what are those dates?
Petition calls for hearsay.
What are you asking? You're asking this witness just to look at that document and show certain dates?
Yes.
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
You indicated that your information was that Lyle Menendez had dated Christy after the two of you split up. Is that correct?
Well, if we split up, then I'm sure he dated a lot of different people.
Okay,
Yeah.
that was your information. That's when he dated her, was after you'd split up. I believe you just testified to that. Is that correct?
Yes, as far as I know, my knowledge of it.
Okay. And when you look at those phone records, does that seem to confirm your state of mind that he dated her in the summer?
Objection irrelevant. lack of
Sustained.
foundation.
Sustained.
Do the phone records we've discussed here indicate that he was calling her in the middle of March of
Your Honor,
1989?
Your Honor, that calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Answer argument.
It would call for conclusion on the part of the witness.
Okay, assuming that the phone records indicate he was calling her the middle of March of 1989, does that cause you to revise your testimony with regard to when you split up?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence and argumentative.
Sustained.
I'll just question whether that causes her to change her testimony or not.
Objection sustained. It's pure speculation looking at that.
Is it still your testimony that you were still going with Lyle Menendez in March of 1989?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Now, I believe that you indicated on direct here yesterday that you first met Lyle Menendez in the fall of 1986. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And where was it that you met him?
We met in, I believe it was the Princeton area of New Jersey.
And you became his girlfriend within weeks, I believe you indicated.
Yes.
And what month is it that you think you became his girlfriend?
I would believe it would be either late October or November of that year.
And you moved into the house with him, is that correct?
13 Vegas, the Princeton house.
Overall.
Did you move into the home in Princeton?
I did stay there on occasion.
When you say on occasion, how often?
I do not remember.
Did you live somewhere else at the time?
Yes.
Where did you live at the time?
There was a tennis coach that had an apartment that was housing several of the players.
Is this Robbie Klaus?
Yes.
And so is it your testimony that you did not live with Lyle Menendez in the Princeton house?
Objection irrelevant, Your Honor.
Overall.
I did stay there. I was traveling on the tennis tour, so I was not really living anywhere at that time.
You broke your ankle during that time, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Were you playing tennis with a broken ankle?
No.
When your ankle was broken, were you living with Lyle Menendez?
I could have stayed there. I do not recall. I didn't remember. I also went home and stayed with my family in Pennsylvania because of the injury.
Okay. Do you remember writing letters to him when you were in the jail? Excuse me, I'm sorry, when he was in the jail after he got arrested?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember talking to him about living with him in the Princeton house?
Objection relevant, Your Honor. New approach.
All right.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
May I mark a 3-page letter as defendant's, 4-page letter, I'm sorry, defendant's, or the next exhibit?
370.
Ms. Pisarcik, I'm showing you a copy of a 4-page letter. Do you recognize your handwriting?
Yes.
Okay. And directing your attention to the second page Would you read this paragraph and tell me if that refreshes your recollection about the time you spent in the Princeton house? Does that letter make reference to the time that you spent with Lyle at that period of time and refer specifically to the, remembering when the heat had been turned off for several days
Yes.
and the two of you still being able to enjoy the time?
Well, I don't really understand the question. What do you mean by?
Well, does it say, do you remember the time at the Princeton house when all of the heat was turned off for several days? We almost froze. Yeah, we made the best of it, and then you go on to talk about making the best of it.
Right?
Is that your handwriting?
Yes.
I believe you also testified on direct that you became engaged to Lyle Menendez and first broke that engagement in 1989, the spring of 1989. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that your testimony that the first time that the engagement was broken was in the spring of 1989?
As I remember it, yes.
And I have another letter, which is two separate handwritten pages, a photograph and an envelope, which I'd like to show to the prosecution.
371.
I'd like my dad is 371.
All right.
Yeah, and it'd be a hearsay objection, part of this. May I approach, Your Honor?
Did you want to pursue that objection or withdrawing it or what?
Ms. Lyons is going to see if she can lay information.
All right.
For the second part, the first part, I don't think there's any objection. Ms. Pisarcik, showing you, well, we've now marked as
371.
371. Do you recognize your handwriting?
Yes.
And can you tell me when you wrote that letter?
It is dated July 14th of 1988.
Okay, and directing your attention to the paragraph at the bottom. Would you read that over?
Yes.
And is it still your testimony that the first time the engagement was broken was in 1989?
Yes, I don't see any.
Does your letter say, so how's my ring? I hope you have it in a safe place, the safety deposit box?
Yes.
What ring were you referring to?
My engagement ring.
Are you feeling okay about our decision to postpone our engagement? Is that correct?
Correct.
I personally am feeling much better about us as a couple, and then you go on and talk about your relationship. Is that correct?
Correct.
Does that indicate that you gave the ring back?
Well, I was traveling at the time in Europe, and I believe that was from another country. And I believe I gave that ring back to Lyle for safekeeping because I was traveling so much and did not want to travel with it.
What about the line that says, are you feeling okay about our decision to postpone our engagement?
Your Honor, objection is hearsay and not a teaching.
Overruled.
Well, when I remember that statement right there that you were referring to, postponing our engagement, Lyle and I never did set a date, so I could have been referring to that. I don't know.
Okay, so you gave him back the ring and wrote a letter about postponing the engagement, but you considered yourself still engaged.
Objection,
Is that your-
Your Honor.
It's argumentative. Rephrase the question.
you gave back the ring to Lyle Menendez, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And you wrote a letter referring to postponing your engagement, is that correct?
Correct.
Is it your testimony that you considered yourself still engaged, even though you wrote about postponing the engagement?
I believe I stated that I considered us engaged until the spring of 1989.
And you remember the spring of '89 as when you and Lyle Menendez split up, is that correct?
That is what I remember, yes.
And what does postponing our engagement mean to you?
To me, it means that we postponed setting a date to get married.
Had you ever set a date to get married?
We had talked about it.
Now, during the, well, I'll save the other part for later. In front of our jury alone. Now, you've testified that you went with Lyle Menendez in the spring of '87 to get his hairpiece. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you had noticed before that that his hair was thinning. Is that correct?
He brought it to my attention and
Okay.
it was noticeable, yes.
Okay. And it was something he was sensitive about. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you continued to accompany him to a place to get a hairpiece in California. Is that correct?
I had been there on several occasions. With,
Okay. Is that something that's referred to as the Hair Replacement Center, HRC?
Yes, I believe so.
And in fact, Detective Zoller asked you if you had accompanied Lyle to the hair reception center out here in California. Is that correct?
Pause for your sake.
Yes.
Okay. And do you know in what manner Lyle Menendez's hairpiece was attached in the spring and summer of 1989?
Objection, lack of foundation into the summer.
I'm sorry?
Lack of foundation into the summer.
Overall.
I know that Lyle had several different type of mechanisms to attach his hair. His first one was different, I believe, than his second one, but
What was the first?
as far as
How the hairpiece was attached?
I believe it had clips.
And
It was
what-
clipped on, I believe.
Okay. And what was the second?
I think there were, I don't know if it was snaps or something like that. I don't recall exactly.
Did he wear it permanently or did he take it off with you?
Sometimes he took it off.
And do you remember in the spring of '89 whether he took it off?
No, I don't remember.
May I approach, Your Honor? I have another copy of which I would like to mark as 372.
All right, 372, what is it?
It is a custom order form from HRC, the Hair Reception Center for Lyle Menendez, the hairpiece dated February 4th, 1989.
Is that hair reception or hair replacement?
Replacement. I'm sorry. Is there showing you this document?
Mhm.
Does it indicate attachment method on here?
That's what it says.
And are there 4 different options listed?
Yes.
And what are the options?
Tape, clips, fusion, and other.
And what is circled here?
Fusion.
You know, I'm going to strike her answer at this point as being hearsay. I thought there was going to be a follow-up.
All right, the objection is sustained, the answer is
May
stricken.
I ask a follow-up question before?
Well, why don't you get to the follow-up question so I have
Does
some
that
idea as to what you're doing.
refresh your recollection as to the way that Lyle Menendez's hairpiece was attached during the spring of '89?
Fusion really doesn't mean anything to me as far as how it was attached. That's what you're asking.
Tape and clips are not indicated,
Okay.
and fusion does not suggest to you that there was something other than tape or clips?
Well, all I know is that when Lyle was in jail, I did take tapes of some kind so that he could
Right,
put
but
them
we're
on his
talking
hair.
about before he was in jail, we're talking about 89,
Okay.
so you don't remember.
Well, I guess it says fusion.
Yeah, I move to strike this speculation.
But you
And the answer is stricken.
have no memory.
Did not seem important to me, I guess. No.
Your Honor, that is all that I have in front of both juries. I have substantial additional material in front of the Lyle Menendez jury only.
Is there any examination by Eric Menendez before both juries?
Yes.
All right, are you ready to do it?
Yes.
Okay, you may.
So, Ms. Pisarcik, when was this conversation that you've testified to with Eric Menendez?
I stated yesterday.
Now, I didn't ask you what you stated yesterday. I'm asking you, when was it?
Excuse me, Your Honor.
All right, let's not argue with the witness. If there's an objection, you can state it to the court.
Can you tell me when it was? Not what you testified to.
I cannot tell you exactly when it was.
What year was it?
I believe it was in 1989.
So you don't know if it was in
I
1989.
do not know the exact date.
Overall,
What month was it?
I do not know the exact date.
What month was it?
Judge, ask and answer, Your Honor.
sustain.
Do you know what month it was?
Ask and answer.
Not by me.
Overall, you can answer the question.
Thank you. I do not recall the exact month.
You don't recall any month, not just that month. Isn't that true?
Objection argumentative.
Overall,
I remember the conversation I had with Eric Menendez.
You told the police on November 2nd, 1993, that Eric didn't know from the beginning about Lyle's hairpiece, but he found out in the spring of 1989. Is that right? Is that what you told the police?
Yes.
You said you were there at the house in Beverly Hills when Eric had overheard their mother talking about the hairpiece. Is that what you told the police?
That is incorrect.
You didn't tell that to the
I
police.
did not say that Eric overheard a conversation.
You didn't say to Detective Zoller that Eric overheard their mother talking about the hairpiece.
No, I did not.
Okay. So if it's here, it's wrong.
Objection argumentative, calls for conclusion.
sustain.
And this is the report. You understand, I'm reading from the same report that Ms. Lansing gave you yesterday to correct.
Yes, I had several minutes to skim over it
I see.
yesterday.
Now, how did you know that Eric didn't know about the hairpiece?
Didn't know what about the hairpiece.
Didn't know about it. That's what you told the police, that in the beginning he didn't know. How did you know that?
Because during our conversation, he expressed at that time that up until that point, he, did not know. And then so he was surprised.
So you didn't know he didn't know until he told you he didn't know. Is that what you're saying?
Could you restate that?
You didn't know that Eric didn't know about it until he told you he didn't know. Is that what you're saying?
I would imagine I assumed that he did not know.
Objection, move to strike as vague and speculation.
Sustain. The answer is stricken.
Now, this hairpiece was obtained the first time in 1987,
Yes.
and you testified it was obtained in the spring of 1987.
It could have been.
No, I didn't ask you if it could have been. Is that what you
I
testified?
do not remember the exact date. I'm trying my best to remember for you and
You're trying your best to make what?
to remember the dates for you. And I'm sorry, it was a very long time ago.
I didn't ask you to remember any dates. I asked you if you testified that Lyle Menendez first obtained a hairpiece in the spring of 1987.
Objection argumentative.
Do you understand the question? The question has to do with what you said yesterday.
Right.
Also, what you just said today.
What is your answer?
I believe that is the time that he got it. It could have been the summer, but I believed, as I remember, it to be the spring.
Do you believe right now, Ms. Pisarcik, that I'm in possession of records that show it couldn't have been in the spring? Is that why you're backing off your answer?
Objection argumentative, Your Honor. It seems factual never.
Sustain.
Well, when was it that he first obtained a hairpiece?
I asked an answer.
Overrule.
When was it, you're asking me?
That's right.
I remember it to be in the spring.
So it's the spring of 1987.
That is what I remember.
And what do you consider the spring?
Well, if you look at a calendar, it would be January, February, March would be winter, so April, May into June.
Do you know what the first day of spring is?
Yes,
What is it?
March 21st.
And do you know what the first day of summer is?
Yes,
What is it?
June 21st or 22nd.
So March, the end of March through June is spring, is that correct?
Pardon me?
The end of March through most of June is springtime.
Yes.
And what precedes that is winter. Is that correct?
Mhm.
And what comes after it is summer. Right?
Yes.
Now, from the time that the Menendez family moved into their home on Elm Drive, how many separate trips to California to see Lyle did you make?
I do not know. There's several.
Well, more than 10?
I do not know.
Could it have been more than 10?
It could have been. I was at the house frequently.
Separate trips.
I do not remember exactly how many trips I made.
Where were you living? What was your permanent residence, if you will, in October of 1988? Where did you live?
I was in Birmingham, Alabama.
That's where your sister lives.
Correct.
And were you living with your sister?
Yes. We lived together for a period of time in Birmingham.
And how long did you live with your sister in Birmingham, Alabama? From what dates to what dates?
I do not recall.
When did you stop living with your sister in Birmingham, Alabama?
This was a long time ago. My sister still lives there, so I don't know.
You don't know.
I lived there until December of that year. So
Till December of what year?
1988.
Have a moment, Sean. Now, between October of 1988 and December of 1988, how many trips did you make to California?
I don't remember.
How many times did you see Eric Menendez during that period of time?
I do not remember, to be exact.
Now, between December of 88 and February of 89, how many trips did you make to California?
I don't remember.
When was Ed Fenno? I'll strike that. Was Ed Fenno living with the Menendez family when they moved into the house in Beverly Hills?
I do know that Edward was out there. I don't remember exactly when Edward moved in.
You say you remember Edward was out there. Out where?
At the Beverly Hills house, because there were occasions when I did see him.
There were times when you saw him there?
Yes.
Did you see him the last time you were there?
I don't remember.
Now tell me about this time where you claim to have had this conversation with Eric Menendez. When did you get to the house? On what day of the week?
It was a long time ago. I do not remember the exact dates.
Well, you don't even remember the month. Is that right? Is that right?
I've told you, I do not remember the exact dates of when I visited the Menendezes many times. It was very
We're
long
only
ago.
talking about this one time, Ms. Pisarcik, and is it your testimony now that you don't remember the month that you were there?
It is my testimony that I don't remember the exact date.
I'm not asking you for the exact date. You know the difference between an exact date such as November 23rd, 1993, and the month such as November.
Yes,
Objection
Okay.
argumentative, move to strike.
Overruled.
Do you remember the month?
I remember approximately the time I was out there.
Okay, let's try that. What's your approximate time now?
Well, when I stated yesterday, it could have been in the spring. It could have been, I don't know, January, February, March, April.
May, June, July, August?
No, it was not that late.
So it could have been anywhere from January through April. Is that what you're saying?
It could have been.
Well, haven't we already demonstrated that it couldn't have been March or April, the spring?
Yes,
Objection
we had.
argumentative, Your Honor, calls for a conclusion.
Sustain the answer, stricken.
Are you satisfied that it couldn't have been the spring now?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
I don't know.
So tell me what you were doing on the day that you say you had this conversation with Eric Menendez. What were you doing?
I was talking to Eric.
Before, the whole day?
No, I don't remember.
Did you wake up talking to Eric?
No, I did
Did
not.
you go to sleep talking to Eric?
Objection argumentative.
Overruled.
No,
Then what'd you do the rest of the day?
I don't recall. It was a long time ago.
Okay, you don't have to tell us it was a long time ago each time. We can count. Why don't you
Your
just
Honor,
tell me?
Move to strike counsel's comments.
All right, the answer or the remark is stricken. Just ask another question, please.
Why don't you tell me what you did at other times on that same day?
I don't remember.
What were you doing in Eric's room that day?
I was not in Eric's room.
Where were you?
I was in the doorway.
And what were you doing in the doorway to
I
Eric's room?
stopped by to say hi. I was in the house and stopped by to say hi.
Why were you in the house?
I was visiting.
Well, when you visited, did you always stay inside the house?
Well, I had to sleep somewhere.
You didn't sleep inside the house. You slept in the guest house. Isn't that true?
True.
You slept in the guest house with Lyle.
Correct.
So you weren't in the house because you were sleeping. Is that correct?
Well, I was invited into the Menendez home.
Did someone invite you into the house just before you had this conversation with Eric?
I don't understand the question.
We're talking about at that time that you claim you do remember when you're standing in the doorway of Eric's room.
Correct.
My question is, what are you doing inside the house at that point? Why are you inside the main house?
Well, because we did a lot of things in the main house. We ate in the main house.
So were you
We
eating at that time on the second floor in front of Eric's bedroom?
No.
So what were you doing inside the house? What had you just done before you were in the doorway of Eric's bedroom?
I don't remember.
And what did you do after this conversation with Eric?
I don't remember what I
Didn't
did.
you run to Lyle and say, how astonishing, your brother didn't know you had a hairpiece, and now he knows because I told him.
No, I did not tell. What do you mean?
You didn't tell Lyle, gee, I've just told your brother that you have a hairpiece, and boy, was he surprised.
I didn't tell Eric that Eric had made that discovery previous,
Oh,
and
you
that was
Didn't tell Eric.
I didn't. Eric told me that he had known that it was that he was. We were talking about it, and he's like, his conversation proceeded that I can't believe Lyle has a hairpiece. I did not bring that up to Eric. I did not. I was not the one that told Eric.
So out of the blue, with nothing preceding it, as you stop by his bedroom, Eric says to you, gee, Jamie, I can't believe Lyle has a hairpiece. Just out of the blue. Is that your testimony?
I don't know if it was out of the blue.
Well, what preceded it?
I don't remember.
So with no recollection of what preceded it, and you didn't bring it up, is that your testimony?
Yes, I did not bring that up.
So out of the blue on this day, Eric brings it up. Is that your testimony?
Well, Eric was surprised. You know, he's, as I said, he was surprised that his brother had had a hairpiece.
Well, how do you know he was surprised?
He told me he was surprised.
So what did he say to you?
I have said,
No, I didn't ask you what you've previously said. I'm asking you now. We have your testimony from yesterday.
right?
What are you now saying?
I'm saying what
Tell me everything you can remember about this conversation. Okay?
yes.
Go ahead. What did you say? What did he say?
What sticks in my mind?
Do you not remember
Very-
what he said?
Excuse me, Your Honor, let us answer the question, please.
Yes, why don't you answer the question?
Thank you. What sticks in my mind is the surprise on Eric's face when he said, I can't believe that all this time Lyle's had a hairpiece. because that is probably why his hair has always looked so perfect all this time. That is what I remember.
So you, without you saying anything to him, Eric simply says to you in great surprise, I can't believe, with nothing preceding it. Is that what you're saying?
Your Honor, objection asked and answered, argumentative.
Sustained.
There's no one else has had a conversation with him that you have heard or you have seen or that you know about. Is that correct?
I don't know.
But you don't know about any other conversation preceding the one that you're talking about. Is that your testimony?
Well,
Objection vague.
Overall.
from that conversation, it was obviously,
I'm not asking for your speculation. I'm asking, do you know of any conversation that preceded the one that you're talking about?
not that I remember.
Do you know who Noel Nedley is?
Noel Nedley?
Yes.
Yes.
And who is he?
I believe he was a friend of Eric's.
He was Eric's roommate at the Marina City Club, correct? And at that time, you were Lyle's roommate at the Marina City Club.
Yes,
And you lived next door to each other.
correct.
Do you remember conversations with Noel Nedley where Noel Nedley said, I never could understand why Lyle's hair was always so perfect, nothing ever looked out of place?
No.
If I were to tell you, Ms. Pisarcik, that this conversation you are attributing to Eric Menendez was actually something said by Noel Nedley, would you deny that?
Excuse me, Your Honor, seems facts not in evidence, argumentative.
Sustained.
Isn't it true that Noel Nedley made this remark that you are now attributing to Eric Menendez?
No.
And isn't it true that Noel Nedley made this remark after you were all living at the Marina City Club long after the homicides?
No.
Now, what happened after this conversation you say you had with Eric? What did you do?
I don't remember what I did.
What time of day was it?
It was sometime during the day. I don't remember the exact time.
What time of day?
I remembering it being daylight.
And you don't remember what you did after?
No.
Who else was in the house?
No.
What you were wearing?
It's a long time ago. No, I don't remember.
What you did that night?
No.
Or ever mentioning this conversation to anybody until you told it to Detective Zoller on November 2nd, 1993. Is that
Well-
correct?
It was a private thing for Lyle. It was none of my business to continue talking about it.
So you never mentioned it to anybody until you told Detective Zoller on November 2nd, 1993.
When I was asked about it, yes.
And he asked you, do you have any reason to believe that Eric Menendez may have known about his brother's hairpiece? Is that what he asked you?
Objection, calls for hearsay and irrelevant if it was asked.
Overall.
I don't remember exactly what was asked, but that could have been the question.
Well, he was asking specifically if you could help him out with any information about Eric knowing about his brother's hairpiece.
Objection, the form of the question was argumentative.
Overall.
Isn't that true?
Well, I answered a question.
I'm
That I
not
was
asking
asked.
you if you answered it. I'm asking if you remember the question.
I remember there being a question about Lyle's hairpiece and if Eric knew about it.
Now, did you read in the paper about Eric's testimony in this trial that although he knew something had been done with Lyle's hair, he didn't specifically know that he had a detachable toupee?
Objection, argumentative, Your Honor.
Overall.
No, I don't recall reading that.
Did anyone tell you that that was his testimony?
No.
Were you told that Eric had testified that he knew nothing about any false hair with Lyle?
No, I was not.
Now, is it your testimony that the only event that you recall occurring during this trip where you claim this conversation occurred was that you went to the theater?
That is something that I do remember from that trip, yes.
You remember that from that particular trip?
I do not know if it was that particular trip. I do remember seeing a play when I was with Lyle on one of my trips.
Okay, so now it's no longer tied to the same trip, seeing the play?
It could
That's
have.
argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained to the form of the question. Answer stricken.
Is the seeing of the play an event that you are sure occurred during the same trip as the conversation you claim you had with Eric?
It could have been.
I didn't ask if it could have been. You would admit anything could be, would you not? Anything's possible.
All right, let's just ask another question.
Yesterday, you testified that during the same trip, you went to the theater. Now, would you like to amend that testimony?
Lyle and I could have seen it during that trip. Yes, that is
But
true.
you could have seen it during a different trip, right?
If I was out here during, a different time when that play was running, yeah, maybe. But
Well, when was the play running?
well, obviously when I was out here.
And when you weren't out here as well, correct?
It's an argumentative, like a foundation.
Overall.
How many times were you out here? In 1988, 1989?
Many times.
So during which time did you see the play?
I believe it was around that time.
When was that time?
The time of what? What are you asking?
Well, you said you believe it was that time. What did you mean by that time?
When I was out here.
Ms. Pisarcik,
Yeah.
you said you were out here more than one time. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yes.
You're sure about that, are you not?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And are you certain that during one of these trips out here, you went to this play?
Correct.
You're sure of that?
Yes, I am.
No doubt in your mind?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what month it was when you went to the play?
Not exactly. I do not.
When you say not exactly, do you have some idea? Or do you have no idea when?
I have an approximate time. I mean, it could have been Christmas time. It could have been January, whenever I was out here.
Were you out here Christmas time?
I believe I was out here around Christmas time.
Were you out here around Thanksgiving time or right after Thanksgiving?
I could have been.
No, I'm not asking what could have been.
I don't
I'm asking
know.
what you remember.
I do not know to be exact.
You don't remember whether or not you were out here close to Thanksgiving 1988. Is that your testimony?
Yes, I'm not sure of the exact dates when I was and was not here.
Well, that's what I'm trying to help you with. Let's focus on the big holidays, okay?
Yeah.
Do you believe-
Counsel's comments, please.
Overall.
Do you believe you were out here at or near Thanksgiving of the year 1988?
I don't remember exactly.
You don't remember. Is that your answer?
I don't remember exactly when I was out here.
Well, we're going to stick with the holidays for the moment. Do you
Okay.
believe you were out here in California at or near Christmas of 1988?
Yes, I believe I was.
You believe you were. So you do remember that.
I remember it being around a holiday, yeah. So it could have been Christmas, New Year's.
Now, you don't have any trouble with that, correct?
Trouble?
You remember that you were out here around Christmas and New Year's.
Objection, Ms. States her testimony.
Sustained. Rephrase the question.
Do you remember that you were out here around Christmas to New Year's of 1988?
Objection, Ms. States her testimony.
Overall.
I remember being out here in California at around that time.
Okay. Now, do you remember being out here around any other time?
Objection, Vegas to hear.
Overall. You understand the question?
Yes. I was out in California many times.
We're talking just about this particular year and this particular time period. Do you understand that, Ms. Pisarcik?
Yes.
Okay, so that's all we're talking about.
Well, you just said any other time.
Any other times besides Christmas, New Year's?
I do remember visiting here several times.
Do you remember visiting here in the spring?
I don't remember the exact dates of when I was here.
So
But
you don't,
yes,
you don't remember.
I did come out to California many times.
Now,
I
you were
stated
on
that.
the professional tennis tour at one time, were you not?
Yes, it was.
And as a professional tennis player, wasn't it real important to make sure you were in the right place at the right time, or you're going to miss your tour, you're going to miss your tournament?
Oh yeah, very important.
And weren't you a person who for years had kept calendars and date books to keep track of your time?
Yes.
And didn't you testify yesterday, in fact, that during the period of 1988 through 1989, you were still playing in tournaments as part of the professional tour?
Yes.
So it was still very important for you to know where you are and where you're going, wasn't it?
Correct. And usually when I was out here in California, it was a vacation time.
Yes. And so you would block out vacation times around the other things that you had to do, correct?
Yeah.
You write it down even.
Maybe. I don't know.
But when it comes to this conversation with Eric, the only thing you can remember is that it happened and nothing else about it. Is that your testimony?
Objection argumentative, Your Honor.
So your testimony that you remember nothing about this conversation, not who was around, not what else you did, not when it occurred, but that it happened.
I remember very distinctly
That
having
it
the
happened.
conversation with her.
But you don't remember the words, do you? Just the general impression. Isn't that what you...
Argumentative, Your Honor.
You know, Your Honor, it would be nice if I could finish the question, and I'm sure counsel
All
will
right, why
object.
don't you do that then?
Thank you very much. So your testimony that you just remember the gist of the conversation, you don't remember the exact words.
Objection argumentative.
Overall.
I remember what Eric said.
Do you remember the exact words or just the meaning that you took from them?
No, I remember what Eric said. I remember
Okay.
that conversation. I stated the words that he spoke to me.
We'll say them again.
Objection answering after.
And your response was?
I remember being surprised, but I don't remember the exact words I spoke to Eric.
Do you remember any of the words you spoke to Eric?
Not specifically, I do not.
The answer is no.
Yes.
I have nothing further on.
Any redirect at this time?
May I have a moment, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Pisarcik, when you had this conversation with Eric Menendez, did you know that over 4 years later you were going to be cross-examined extensively about it?
Objection, Your Honor, it's irrelevant.
No, I did not.
At the time you had the conversation with Eric Menendez, was there anything about it that made you think you should go run and write it down for later reference?
Objection, Your Honor, this is leading and argumentative.
No, I did not.
At the time that you had this conversation with Eric Menendez, did you know that your boyfriend was going to end up in a murder trial involving his parents?
No, I certainly did not.
Now, at the time that you were asked by Detective Zoller about this conversation, did you have your Casa Lupita work records available to you to reconstruct where you had been in that particular time, the spring of 1989?
No.
Now, yesterday, Miss Lansing and I came to you, and Miss Lansing asked you to make some corrections to that particular police report. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Stating the conversation.
All right. Do you remember?
All right, objection to stay in the
Okay.
answer straight.
Do you remember yesterday being asked to correct the police report, which reflects the conversation with Eric Menendez and other matters, in the presence of myself and Miss Lansing?
Your Honor, I'm going to object again. I believe that she was asked to review it.
Okay, well, again, the question's being asked. You could say yes or no. It didn't happen that way.
Okay. Were you asked to review the police report in my presence and Miss Lansing's yesterday out in the hallway?
Yes, I was.
And did you make some corrections to that particular report?
Yes, I did.
At the time that you were asked to make the corrections, did Miss Lansing provide you with your Casa Lupita work records?
No, she did not.
Now, I believe that you've indicated that you traveled to California several times. Was that during the period of time that the Menendez family was living in Beverly Hills?
Yes, I mean there was times during it and after, but yes,
Now,
before and after.
Now, the work
Right.
records from Casa Lupita, which you were shown yesterday, seem to indicate long periods of time where you worked every day without a break. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
During this period of time, did Lyle Menendez ever have a job?
I don't think so.
And the whole time that you knew Lyle Menendez, did he ever have a job where he got paid to work?
Ron, I'm going to object. It's irrelevant. Needs to be on the scope.
Sustained.
When you were you working for fun or were you working for another reason?
I was working because I had to work.
Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant. Move to strike.
Overrule the answer will stand.
I believe you've indicated that you are familiar with a man named Ed Fenno. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do you have a specific recollection sitting here today of seeing Ed Fenno at the Beverly Hills house on at least one trip to California?
Yes.
Do you remember if you saw him on more than one trip to California?
Yes, I believe it was more than once.
Now, this credit card that you used for the telephone calls about which you were asked yesterday, did anyone ever call you up and tell you that you should stop using that particular phone credit card?
No.
Okay. Now, I believe the records indicated, the ones that you were looking at yesterday, that your sister also used that credit card. Is that your recollection of what the record said?
Yes.
Are you responsible financially for your sister?
No.
How old is your sister presently?
26.
Okay.
And yeah, 26.
I believe there were some questions asked of you of your knowledge of the particular trial that we're having here. Have you ever watched Courtroom TV, which gives live coverage of the courtroom?
No, I have not.
And when you've indicated you've seen it on television, would that be during news clips?
Correct.
Okay, so like the 5 o'clock news or the 11 o'clock news or something like that?
Yes.
Now, you were asked about your relationship with Mrs. Menendez. Do you remember that yesterday, being asked about that?
Yes.
Did you bring to court a card that Mrs. Menendez had sent you in 1987?
Yes, I did.
And I've showed this to the defense if you want to see it again. May this be marked as next in order, I don't know.
373.
Thank you. Can I approach, please?
Yeah.
I'm going to show you a card. It's got a art print on the outside, and on the inside appears to be a salutation. Could you tell me if you recognize the contents of this card?
Yes, I do.
Is that a card sent to you by Kitty Menendez on the 18th? It's dated 18th of September of 1987.
Yes, it is.
And it indicates in the last paragraph, Lyle said he owes you this. Thank you for lending it to him. Do you know what that was?
It was money.
Okay, so you had lent him some money?
Yes.
Do you know approximately how much money you had lent him?
I believe it was several $100s.
And when this card arrived, was there some kind of money in it?
Yes.
And do you remember if it was cash or a check or what?
I believe it was a check.
Now, you were asked yesterday about how Mrs. Menendez felt about you, and you indicated, I know how Mrs. Menendez felt about me. When you say that, what are you basing your knowledge on?
Well, just the relationship that I had with her.
Okay, did you ever go out to lunch with Mrs. Menendez?
Yes.
Was that when you were with other family members or just the two of you?
We went shopping and we went out to lunch several times together.
And it was just the two
Just
of you?
the two of us, yes.
Was she nice to you?
Very.
And when you came to stay at the house in Beverly Hills, did Mrs. Menendez ever tell you that she wanted you to leave, or did she ever do anything to indicate to you that she didn't like you?
No.
Okay. Would it be a surprise to you to learn that Mrs. Menendez didn't like you?
Yes.
Okay. Did you think she did?
I thought she did, yes.
And how about Mr. Menendez? How did he treat you?
Fine. And we had to, Mr. and Mrs. Menendez both came and watched me play in several tennis tournaments, and, they were very supportive.
Ms. Pisarcik, I believe you were shown a card in which some money was returned to you by Mrs. Menendez, which you had loaned to Lyle Menendez. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yes.
And during the course of time that you were dating Lyle Menendez, did he have money to buy you things?
Yes.
Did he buy you a lot of things?
Yes, he tried.
What kinds of things did he buy you?
Jewelry, clothing.
What kind of jewelry? You bought you an engagement ring, we know
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Did it have a diamond in it?
Yes. Other rings, bracelets, watches, those type of things. Gifts.
So these were things he was paying for you during the time that you were dating him. Is that correct?
Objection to suicide content and lack foundation.
Overall.
He bought, me gifts for, occasions, birthdays, the normal.
Did he give you presents just for no purpose sometimes?
Yes, occasionally.
What kinds of presents?
Teddy bears.
Did he send you flowers
Yes.
regularly,
No, not regularly.
often?
Several times.
Did he buy you some pet?
Bought me a bird.
Did he buy you an animal that you called Sapphire?
Yes,
What was that?
that was a bird.
And did you comment to him in your letters to him about the fact that he was always giving you surprises, roses, and presents?
Yeah, he did.
Did he buy
On
you
occasion.
golf clubs?
No.
Pay for haircuts for you?
No, I don't believe so.
And he did this during the entire time you were dating him, is that correct?
But he did what?
He did this during the entire time you were dating him, that is, bought you presents and was generous with you, is that correct?
Yes.
And there was a period of time when he went to Australia to play tennis, is that correct?
Correct.
And he called you every day from Australia, is that correct?
I don't remember that.
Would it refresh your recollection to look at a letter that you wrote to him?
It might, yes.
And I have a letter dated February 17th, 1987. I'd like to mark that as next in order.
374.
Thank you. Do you recognize his letter?
Mhm.
And is that a letter that you wrote to Lyle?
Yes.
Let me show you. I'd also like to mark as 375, a letter dated 1987, February 10th. I'm here home. Directing your attention first to 375. Is that also a letter in your handwriting to Lyle?
Yes, it does look that
And
way.
is that February 10th, 1987?
Correct.
And does it indicate here, I wish you tons of luck in Australia?
Yes,
And so do you remember that this was a period of time when he was in Australia?
it looks that way.
And the next letter, February 17th, says, I just got off the phone with you, how I look forward to hearing your voice each night. Does that refresh your recollection as to whether he called you every day from Australia?
Well, I do not remember that he did call me every day. I don't remember
Does
that.
this letter indicate you look forward to talking to him every night?
Objection called for hearsay.
Overall.
The way I understand this letter is, yes, I do look forward to hearing his voice every night, but it does not state that he did call me every night.
Okay, so you just wrote a letter saying you just got off the phone and you look forward to hearing from him every night, your voice each night, but that doesn't indicate that he called you each night.
No, it does not.
I believe that, sorry, did you, may I have one moment? You were asked something about the jobs that you were working or the number of days you were working, is that correct?
Yes,
And I think Mrs. Bazanich asked you if Lyle ever had a job.
correct.
Did he have a job?
I remember one time he delivered pizzas for a very short period of time, like a week or two.
Okay.
And pardon me.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you'd finished.
And then he also worked for his father for a very brief period of time as well. That's
And those are the only jobs you remember.
yes.
Do you ever remember a time when he had two jobs at the same time?
No.
You know, I'd like to mark as 376 a card.
Can I have a moment, please, to read this?
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
So I think I'm showing you a card which has handwriting in it.
Okay.
Recognize that handwriting?
Yes, I do.
And directing your attention to this paragraph toward the bottom. Can you read that first sentence for me?
Uh-huh.
Can you read it out loud?
I'm really proud of you for working so hard at 2 jobs. Mhm.
Mrs. Bozanich asked you about the use of the phone credit card.
Yes.
And I believe you said 2 of your sisters were using that card. Is that correct?
Yes, Lyle gave permission to both my sisters.
Okay. And the calls that we were talking about were in 1989, so that's 4 years ago. So you said one of your sisters is 26 now?
Mm-hmm.
What's her name?
Molly.
Okay. So Molly would have been 22 at the time?
Yes.
And your other sister's name is?
Jill.
And how old is she now?
Jill is 28.
So she would have been 24 at the time. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Mhm.
And you also let a friend of yours named Kelly Kalankowitz use that phone card, didn't you?
I do not remember.
Do you remember Detective Zoller talking to you about a call made to Kelly Kalankowitz's home on the night that the Menendez parents died?
No, I don't remember.
Now, when you broke up with Lyle, or Lyle broke up, when the 2 of you split up, you
Mhm.
did not notify either of your sisters they weren't to use the card?
Lyle continued talking to my sisters and calling my sisters during that summer. So, I don't know what was said in their conversations, but that was not a priority of mine. I talked to my sisters probably once a month because we live in different parts.
My question, Ms. Pisarcik, is did you tell them not to use the card?
No, I did not.
Okay. And you continued to use the card?
I don't know of those calls yesterday, which ones were mine.
Well, the one to Richard Garrett, Rick, who was your roommate for a period of time.
Correct?
I think you indicated those might have been yours. Is that correct?
They could have been. I mean, I lived with Rich Garrett, so I don't know why I would have called him. Maybe it was Lyle calling me at Rich's. I don't know.
And what about if it was during a time when you and Lyle were split up?
Lyle and I were still friendly at that time. Lyle came and visited
So is
me
it
at
your
Casa
testimony
Lupita.
that you never used that card?
No, it is not.
Did you
I-
use that card?
Yes, I did.
And did you use it during periods of time other than a week or 2 before the Menendez parents died?
Yes, when Lyle gave me permission to use it.
All right. But once you had split up, you indicated to the police when they asked you about this card
Mhm.
that Mrs. Menendez had given you permission to use it for a week to 2 weeks before the Vermont tournament. Is that correct?
Objection, argument would be on scope 352.
Is that correct?
Yes, she did.
Okay. So when Mrs. Menendez said, you can use this card to arrange this tennis tournament so you and my son can play in the same tournament together, did you say to her, you don't need to give me authorization? Lyle gave me permission and everybody in my family a long time ago, and we still have it.
I don't remember that, being the conversation. I don't know really what you're asking.
So you didn't say anything to her, or you did, or?
I don't remember, her making a point of saying this is the only time you can use this card. I don't recall that.
Did you assume that, you don't remember her saying this is the only time you can use this card?
I just remember her saying, Jamie, go ahead and use the phone card
For what?
to call me and to set up the plans for the tournament.
Okay, and this was a week
It
or
was
two.
very casual in the way she said it. It was not brought up as a major point.
And this was a week or two before the tournament. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
And the tournament was August 20th, the same day that the Menendez parents died. Is that correct?
It
The
was-
same weekend.
Yes.
So it's your testimony that she said, go ahead and use this card for this tournament. And you didn't say, that's okay, we've all been using it all along anyway. I don't need special permission.
I don't remember saying that to her, no.
And who did you think was paying the bill on the phone card?
You asked me that yesterday. I don't know.
Did you think Lyle was paying it personally?
No, Lyle was very kind of flippant with the way he used that card. I'm sure he gave it to other friends too.
Strike that. So my question is, did you think that Lyle was paying the bill or someone else was?
I don't know.
You never asked.
Well, Lyle said, Jamie, here's a card for you to use when you call your family, when, you call and make important phone calls.
But you two had broken up. Is that correct?
Not when he had that conversation with me, no.
No, but I mean, when you continued to use the card.
We were still friendly and we had seen each other that summer.
Right.
Right.
But you weren't dating.
Okay, this area has been covered already. Let's go on to something else.
Mrs. Bozanich asked you about your relationship with Mrs. Menendez. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes.
And you said that you thought you got along just fine. Is that right?
Yes.
Was she nice to your face?
Yes, she was.
Do you know that she told Terry Baralt to get a key to the condo that she and Jose Menendez were buying for Lyle so that Terry Baralt could search and make sure your clothing was not in there and to let her know immediately if you stayed there?
No, I was
Objection,
not.
argumentative, striking.
Sustained, the answer is stricken.
Did you know that she told a number of her friends and her therapist that she was very disapproving of the relationship with you?
Objection calls for hearsay and also argumentative.
Sustained.
Your Honor, this is under state of mind. She's been asked what her state of mind was with regard to her
Yes,
relationship with
I understand that,
Mrs.
but that
Menendez.
doesn't authorize that sort of questioning of the witness. That doesn't open the door to that sort of questioning.
So it's your testimony. Is that correct?
Yes.
Change her opinion if she didn't.
And that was based on the way she acted to your face. Is that correct?
Yes. And the letter that Pam has says love Kitty on it. So
Okay. And you had no knowledge about what she was saying behind your back.
no,
Is that correct?
that is correct.
You said that the Menendez parents came and watched you play tennis
Yes,
in tournaments.
correct.
How many times?
Several times.
Is that twice? Is that 5 times?
Probably twice. I didn't play a lot of local tournaments in California where they could have just driven to, but they did come and see me play some tournaments.
When was that?
When I was out here visiting Lyle and then playing tournaments, Lyle and I played in a couple tournaments at the same time as well.
Do you know the year?
Not to be exact, on one of my trips out here.
Do you know the year?
No, not off the top of my head. I do
You
not.
dated Lyle in 1986, 1987, and 1989. Do you have any idea? You said that there were about 2 times this happened.
Correct.
You have no idea which year?
Well, I dated him in 86. I was working in Birmingham most of 87, so it could have been 88. Yeah.
And do you know where these tournaments were?
In the surrounding areas within driving distance.
And do you remember any occasion in which you were so nervous about having the Menendez family watch you that you claimed you were sick and didn't play that day?
I do remember defaulting from a tournament where the Menendez was there because I was sick, yes.
I have nothing further at this time.
All right, anything else on behalf of Eric Menendez? Any redirect at this point? All right, how long will the examination be before the Lyle Menendez jury?
I'd say about 45 minutes, Your Honor.
All right, then what we'll do is have the Eric Menendez jury come back at, let's make it an hour from now and see how we're doing. And it's now 10:30, and if you would come back at 11:30 and we'll see, perhaps we'll have some more testimony this morning, perhaps not, but at least we'll have you here in case we can get to some more testimony before both juries. And we'll also take a morning break, and the blue jury is excused until 11:30, and the gold jury, please return, and we'll have you start up again at 10:45 in 15 minutes.
After the death of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez, you saw Lyle Menendez at the memorial service. Is
I
that correct?
saw him the night before. It was the
And-
first time,
You had dinner, he and your mother and you,
correct?
and you spent the night with him that night, didn't
Yes.
you? And what condition was he in that night?
At dinner, he was fine.
What about when you went back to the room?
He did cry.
All night?
No, not all night.
A lot?
Yes, he did.
Did he do something unusual with a watch he was wearing?
I don't remember.
Do you remember telling your mother that that night was the hardest night of your life because of having to take care of Lyle Menendez and how he felt?
I remember probably discussing with her that, yes, it was a difficult night.
Do you remember telling her that he was wearing a gold watch, which he took off and threw across the room?
No, I don't remember.
You don't remember telling her, or that?
I do not remember stating that, no.
Do you remember if that happened or not?
No, I don't.
So are you saying it didn't happen, or you just don't remember one way or the other?
I'm saying I don't remember. It was an emotional night. I don't remember.
But you do remember talking to your mother about it the next morning?
My mother was there in town, throughout the whole memorial service.
Right, but I mean, you remember talking to your mother the next morning about what that evening had been like. Is that correct?
I would assume that I mentioned some things to her about it, yeah.
And do you remember writing a letter to Lyle Menendez when he was in jail, talking about how hard the period after his parents' death had been?
I wrote Lyle letters almost every day.
Okay. Do you remember writing him a letter that talked about back in September you were going through some difficult times, so were you in October, November, December, and January. That's why I was there.
Your Honor, I'd object to this as being beyond the scope and improper from the commissioner unless they want to take a witness on Friday.
All right, how much of this examination do you have?
That was it. I'm just going to ask her if she remembers that period of time being a difficult period of time.
All right, objection overruled.
Difficult in what way? I don't believe I understand what you mean by
Well,
difficult.
Would it assist you to look at the letter?
Perhaps.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes,
I'd like to make this next in order.
377.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes,
Your Honor, this is 377.
377.
I'm showing you what it's been marked as 377.
Okay.
Does that appear to be a copy of the letter you wrote April 20th, 1990?
Yes.
And in that letter, just starting at the line I'm pointing to,
Okay.
can you read that?
Mhm.
Okay. Does that seem to indicate that Lyle was going through difficult times in September, October, November, December, and January, and you were there trying to help him out?
Yes.
And you were with him that whole time, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I believe you've testified that you were still his girlfriend in March of 90 when he was arrested.
Well, when he was arrested, still his girlfriend, there was a period of time when I moved out of the Marina City Club, which was, I believe, sometime in January.
Okay. So you were part in January, February.
Right. And then when he got put back into jail, it was a time that brought us closer together, obviously.
So your relationship resumed then on his arrest in March, is that correct?
Well, no, we did see each other during that period of time. I just was not living with him at the Marina City Club at the time. I had moved into my own apartment.
And you had moved into your apartment because the two of you had broken up at that point in time?
It was very difficult for me to handle the emotional things I was going through. And I just felt, it was difficult for me. And it would probably be better if I moved out. Yes.
And when you went back together, you indicated that you moved into the Beverly Hills home. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was at Lyle's suggestion?
Yes.
And I believe you testified that it was because it would be safer for you. Is that correct?
That is what Lyle told me. Yes.
And where were you living before you moved into the Beverly Hills home?
I had an apartment.
What area?
In the Westwood area.
Now, I think you've testified that the reason you were told to move back into the house was because of the circumstances surrounding the parents' death. Is that correct?
Lyle said that he felt it would be safer if I were in the Beverly Hills house.
Safer in what way? Was there any discussion about that?
Well, again, he had told me it was the mob, the mafia, that there was someone to fear.
Now, how was it going to be safer to be in the house where the parents were killed than to be in an apartment somewhere else in the city?
Well, Lyle's grandmother was, I believe, there at the time, and he just felt it was a more unified, safer situation.
She was going to protect you from the mafia?
No, not necessarily.
She's a woman in her 70s?
Yes, correct. And I did not mean to say that it was Mrs. Menendez, grandmother Menendez, that was protecting me. Lyle just felt it was a safer, all-around situation.
Did you say anything like, this is where your parents were killed? If there's anybody out there who's dangerous, the first place they're going to look is in this house.
Objection argument if it won't.
No.
Now, when you lived in the apartment, you had to pay rent, I take it?
Yes,
And when you lived in the Menendez house, you did not.
correct.
Is that correct? And at some point, you moved out of the Beverly Hills house into the other home owned by the family, the Calabasas house.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And when did you move to the Calabasas house?
I believe it was around the time that they were trying to sell the Beverly Hills house. Again, I don't remember the exact month or date, but
Would
it
that
was
have
about.
been summertime or fall?
I was probably staying in the Beverly Hills guest house for several months. So yes, it could have been summer or fall. It wasn't a long period of time in
And
either place.
someone helped you move into the Calabasas house. Is that correct?
I would imagine. I mean, I did not live there alone. Noel also lived there with me.
Right. But do you remember telling the police that your current boyfriend, Jamie, helped you move into the house?
No, he did not help me move into the house.
He didn't help you move into the Calabasas house?
No, it was out of the Calabasas house.
And when was that?
That would have been November I believe, of that same year, yet he is my current boyfriend now. He was not my boyfriend then.
He was your boss at the time,
Yes.
is that correct?
Yes.
And when did you first get to know him?
Objection, relevancy, Your Honor.
Sister.
You told us that at one point in time, Lyle Menendez gave you back the engagement ring.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, this is the ring that you had been given earlier and had given back to him when the two of you split up in January.
Correct.
And when was it that you got the engagement ring?
Shortly after he had gone back into jail. I don't remember the exact.
Okay, well, if I tell you your mother was here the month of October
Right.
Objection, vague, October, which
of 1990,
Okay.
she was present at the jail, wasn't she?
Present
When you got the ring back?
I don't remember that.
Do you remember being given the ring by Terry Burrell?
Yes, I do.
And do you remember going down to the jail with your mother and someone named Tim Custer?
I know Mr. Custer had been at the jail many times.
And do you remember,
remember
a
that.
conversation with Lyle Menendez about you asking him what he'd gotten you for Sweetest Day, which
No.
falls in October?
No.
Do you remember having Lyle Menendez get down on his knee and propose to you at your direction?
No.
So you have no memory of that at all
No. Lyle got down on his knee.
in the jail.
That did not occur.
Were you engaged to him
At which time?
at this time when you got the ring back?
Lyle and I had, it was more of a token, I would say, at that time of, how could we be engaged? He was in jail type of thing.
So you weren't engaged.
Well, it was an unsaid feeling that, when you wear an engagement ring, obviously you're engaged. But,
So is your testimony that you were engaged or that you weren't engaged?
well, my testimony is that it's kind of hard to be engaged when Lyle is incarcerated. But yes, I did. He asked me to again wear the ring for hope of a future together. Yes.
Okay, so let me try one more time. Were you engaged?
Your Honor, after.
Just yes or no?
Overall, and you're asking about now what time?
We're talking about in the fall when she got the engagement ring back.
Do you understand the question?
If you could restate it, please.
Yes. You remember when you got the engagement ring back from Terry Burrell
Yes, I do remember Terry giving it to me.
and you started wearing it?
Mhm.
Yes?
Yes.
Were you engaged or not engaged?
I would say that would be, if I'm wearing an engagement ring, I would be engaged.
And do you remember telling the district attorney and the police when you were interviewed by them, and the interview was taped November 30th, 1992, on page 25, starting at line 17. Question,
Wait, just one. All right.
okay?
Could we actually back up to put it in context, please?
How far back up do you want to go?
Line 4.
We're just talking about the engagement, so
All right.
let me just start with that. Line 17, question. At the time that he did this, you were engaged to marry him. Is that right? Line 19, answer, no, that's incorrect. He had given me an engagement ring several years prior. Question, oh, before all this happened, answer, yes. Question, okay. Answer, and when we broke up that time in April, I gave it back, and when he went to jail shortly after, he asked me if I would wear the ring again. That ring was made for me. There were no plans of marriage. Do you remember telling him that?
Well, yeah, it was kind of hard to make plans when I was incarcerated.
Your Honor, may I mark another exhibit? Number 78? Thank you. Marking 2 pages. letter dated May 8th, 1990.
Your Honor, may we approach, please?
Now, is that is your handwriting?
Yes.
Would you please read to us, starting at this paragraph? The second
This one?
paragraph. Yes.
You want me to read it
Yeah.
to myself?
No.
Oh, okay. Can't wait to see our wedding plans. I thought that the woman was supposed to make the plans. Actually, when the time comes, it will be fun doing it together. Like I told you tonight, you make me excitedly nervous when you talk of wedding plans.
Keep going.
My only wedding plans are that you are the groom. So maybe I have other plans too, but it sounds good. Do you want to hear what my dream wedding includes? Let's see. A very formal evening wedding where everyone, including you, is in black except me. Tails for the men, of course. I'd love to get married in the Princeton Chapel, but is it too far away from Tavern on the Green? Maybe not if everyone stays in New York City the night of the wedding. Shall I continue?
Okay, that's done. Your next question, please.
Ms. Pisarcik, do you go on and talk about the number of people at the wedding, 200 to 300 people?
Yes.
And you talk about specific churches, St. Paul's?
Right.
And you talk about who you want to officiate?
Mhm.
And you talk about wanting a boys' choir singing?
Yep, those are all dreams of mine.
And you talk about, well, you refer to a specific priest. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you talk about exactly what your dress should look like.
Right.
And that you want flowers that are both red and white.
Excuse me, Your Honor.
Yes, I think we have covered the area. You have a question about this?
I just have one additional question. And did you also list specifically the people you wanted to be your attendants in this wedding?
My friends.
And this is the letter you wrote to Lyle in jail, May 8th, 1990.
Yes.
When did you move into the Beverly Hills house? In reference to when Lyle Menendez got arrested?
I would assume he was arrested in March, so I would assume it was shortly after that.
Couple weeks?
I don't remember. Could have been a month, could have been 2 months, I don't remember.
Could have been a month or 2 months?
It could have been, yes. I don't remember.
Now, you've told us here that you have not followed this trial that closely. Is that correct?
No, I make a point not to. I don't have to.
Now, when you were interviewed by Detective Zoller on November 2nd, 1993, which is just a few weeks ago, is that correct? You handed Detective Zoller an envelope. Is that correct?
Correct.
And his report talks about the circumstances under which you got the letter that was in the envelope. Is that correct?
Yes.
Excuse me, Your Honor. I believe this is beyond the scope. The direct examination and all the process, looking into an area now.
All right, did you want to approach and
Yes,
discuss
Your
it? Okay, you may do that.
Ms. Pisarcik, remember when you talked to Detective Zoller, you gave him an envelope with some material in it,
All right.
right? And do you remember telling him that during the trial, some information came out about Lyle Menendez indicating that he'd been told by his father that his father had sponsored you to send you off to Europe to split up the relationship?
I'm sorry, can you restate that?
Okay.
As far as the first part of it, I didn't.
All right. Do you remember that there was testimony to that effect?
I don't remember that there was testimony to the fact, no.
Did you tell Detective Zoller? And I'm reading from the report I asked you to look at yesterday and tell me if there were any errors in.
Okay.
Jamie said that after she heard during the trial that Mr. Menendez had paid for her sponsorship by using an anonymous name, she contacted Mr. Nall to ask him of the sponsorship for her play in Europe.
Well, that is incorrect as far as the report. Lyle told me that in 1990, when I believe the document is dated, I did not hear that in the trial. Lyle told me himself that Mr. Menendez had sponsored me and tried to send me off to Europe somewhere.
Right, that's
I-
before he was arrested,
Yes,
right?
I did not believe him, so I took it upon myself to contact my sponsors just to prove that Lyle had lied to me again as far as his father's, involvement in that.
Or that his father had lied to him.
Possibly, whatever. I was just getting proof that his father did have nothing to do with the sponsorship.
Okay. But my question of you is, the report that I asked you to look over yesterday is 1.5 pages long. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I asked you to go through it and tell me if there were things that were wrong in the report. Is that correct?
Yes, there were a lot of details. Yes.
And in fact, you made some corrections. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the area that I'm referring to now, which says Jamie said that after she heard during the trial that Mr. Menendez had paid for her sponsorship by using an anonymous name, she contacted Mr. Nell to ask him of the sponsorship for her play in Europe.
Well, that
Is that
isn't.
what it says?
I don't know what it says that is incorrect as far as the time frame.
Okay.
I did not call Mr. Nall after I had heard there was testimony.
So
I called Mr. Nall way before in 1990.
when Detective Zoller wrote this down, it was wrong.
I cannot see that in front of me right now, but if what you are saying is in that report, I did not contact Mr. Nall after I heard testimony
Okay.
about that. I contacted Mr. Nall in 1990 when Lyle told me that Mr. Menendez had sponsored me, and it wasn't true sponsors, that it was Mr. Menendez behind it.
Okay, so
That's when I contacted Mr. Nall.
my question of you is, if Detective Zoller wrote that down, it was a mistake.
Yes, it sounds like it if that's what
When
you're
you
reading.
read it yesterday and I asked you to look for any mistakes, you didn't notice that it was a mistake then.
I must not have, no.
Okay. And you did, in fact, on your own, without the police even asking you for this information, volunteer information which you believed would show that Lyle Menendez was lying.
No, the detectives asked me if I had any documents or letters, and I perceive that to be a pertinent document. That's all.
Now, when did he ask you if you had any documents or letters?
I believe during one of those, sessions when I sat down with him.
So if he indicates that you just on your own handed him this envelope, which was a letter to you from Mr. Now, then that would be wrong in his report also. Is that correct?
Well, I don't really understand what you're asking.
My question is, if you volunteered this document because you thought it would help get Lyle Menendez convicted.
No, I gave that document because I don't know if it was during this session or a session before with the detectives. I had been asked if there were any documents. And at the time, I obviously didn't recollect, but I had found this document during the time. And
Okay, so at the time you gave it to Detective Zoller, you had no idea that it had any connection to any testimony in this trial. Is that your testimony?
yes, I don't recall.
Now, you also, when you reviewed this report, one of the changes you made was there is a paragraph that talks about you getting books for Lyle in the jail. Is that correct?
Correct, I believe so.
And you said that you sent him books in the jail several times a week.
Sometimes, yes.
So you sent him a great number of books.
Yes, many.
And when you were interviewed by Detective Zoller November 2nd, 1993, you said the only book that you could remember was a book on sign language.
At that time, yeah.
Is that correct?
I believe so. Yes,
And-
that at that time.
Yesterday afternoon, for the first time, you remembered that the one other book you got him was on the Billionaire Boys Club. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do you know that that has been an issue in this trial?
No.
So it just is something you just came up with?
Well, I was asked if at the first time, November 2nd or 3rd, when I was questioned, if I remembered any titles. That's the first time that I had been asked to think about that.
Okay.
And And at that time, when I was asked the question, I did remember the sign language and book, and there have been since then other titles that I remembered. And obviously that was one that stuck in my mind.
And what other ones do you remember?
As far as
Other books you sent him?
I sent him several sign language books. I sent him Mishner. I sent him numerous books. Poland, I sent him there's many to recall. Some books that I recommended to him, some books that he requested. There's many books.
Any of them about child abuse?
If there were any about child abuse, it did not state so in the title so that it would, be reflective of what, I was getting.
Now, when Mrs. Pisarcik and I asked you yesterday if there were any books about child abuse, you said no.
Not that I remember in the titles.
And did you look at the books that you were buying?
Well, some of the books that I bought that I thought he might enjoy, yeah, obviously. And then there were many that he requested titles of, names of books. And so I purchased those books for him.
And why did the BBC book particularly stand out in your mind?
It is just one of the titles that I remembered.
Okay, so you remember that and Poland and a sign language book,
At this time, yes.
but no other titles.
Not that come to my mind at this time.
And do you remember writing to him about books that you sent him?
As I said, I've written Lyle very frequently, so I may have written.
Your Honor, I just want to refresh recollection. You want me to mark these
If
collectively?
you're not going to use it
I would
as an
like to
exhibit, then,
I'd like to mark it.
okay. We'll mark them as 379. People letters.
Yes, these are letters written by Amy to Lyle in jail. First one says April 10th, 1990. Pisarcik, would you look at the April 10th, 1990 and see if you listed the names of some books you sent him?
Yes.
And what are they?
There is a book, it says on the Civil War, doesn't have a title. Robert Frost poems, quotes by Martin Luther King, and a surprise book in The Hobbit.
And then on April 25th,
Trinity. Poland. Oh, no, sorry. Something
not
else.
Poland.
Yeah,
Right, it's talking about
Poland, yes.
about Poland, but the book is Trinity.
Right.
Okay, and then you have a list of books on the May 1st, 1990. I sent you 4 books today. What are they?
Profiles in Courage, an Abe Lincoln book, a book about flying, and a Plato book.
And there's no reference to any book about the Billionaire Boys Club, is that correct?
No, not at that time.
And these are books that you sent him and you wrote about sending him, but none of these titles stuck with you, is that correct?
Well, there are many titles there, and there's many, many more books that I sent him, so.
And did you attempt to get any records about the various bookstores that you went to, or assist the police in finding the bookstores you went to find your back orders?
I don't really understand that question.
Oh, let me strike that. What bookstores did you buy books from?
I bought books from books all over Southern California, sometimes in Pennsylvania. When I was in Pennsylvania, I had books shipped from there. I gave you guys books sometimes.
But when you
In the
were
attorney's room.
living out here,
Mhm.
you said you had books shipped from Pennsylvania. You lived out here the entire time he was in jail till you broke up with him, didn't you?
Right. But I mean, I visited in my family, Christmas, holidays, that type of thing.
You testified that you also were asked to get cases from the law library.
Yes.
Okay. And were you given a list of citations, the names of the cases?
Yes.
And how many names were you given? How many cases were you given?
I don't remember. Several.
2, 3,
I don't recall how many.
more than 5, more than 10? Can you give us a range?
Between 3 and 10, it could have been. I don't.
Okay.
I don't
And did
recall.
you go by yourself or with somebody else to the law library?
I do remember being by myself.
Okay. And were these California cases?
That I don't recall.
Were there areas in the law library that had groups of books that seemed to be grouped by states or by federal or?
I had never been in a law library before, so I had asked a clerk I handed over the names that Lyle had requested and asked a clerk if they could obtain, those certain cases.
Okay, so it's your testimony that you went into the law library and you gave the clerk who was working there this list of cases, like a shopping list.
Well, I said I was looking for these. I don't know what I'm looking for, obviously. I don't know where to find them. Can you
Did they
please
tell
assist
you
me?
where to find them, or did this clerk pull them for you?
I don't recall. I believe they may have pulled them for me, but I don't recall exactly.
Was it a man or a woman?
I don't remember.
Young or old?
I don't remember.
Black or white?
I believe it was a white person. I believe it was a man, to tell you the truth.
A
but
white man?
I don't know for sure.
Young or old?
I don't remember.
And you gave him this list of 3 to 10 cases, and he went and got all the books for you, or made copies for you, or what?
No, the individual that helped me, I made the actual copies of the books.
So did this person tell you where to find the books or bring you all the books?
I believe it was, I, again, as I stated, did not know where to find any of these. So I don't remember if he actually took me there, if he pulled the books. I don't remember the exact sequence.
Did the books all appear to be from one section in the library or from different sections?
I don't remember.
Did the library have one room or more than one room?
It was one room. It's a law library.
As you walked in the door, were the books to your left or to your right?
I believe they were to my left because I believe that the place where the clerk was sitting and the copy machine was to my right.
And so did the clerk say, go over there against the wall, that's where the cases are? Or the clerk went and got the books for you?
Answer.
I don't remember. I remember going in there not really knowing where to find any of the cases that Lyle had asked me. So the first thing I did was ask for assistance.
Okay, my question is, the books are thick, is that correct? And they have a number of cases in them?
Correct.
Did you go get the book yourself and find the case within the book? Or did the clerk bring you the book and then you found the case?
I believe, and I don't remember 100%, I believe that the clerk could have gotten the books and possibly even showed me the case because, again, I didn't know what I was looking for.
So this clerk got the books, found the case, opened them all up and gave them to you?
I can't say that was what's 100% true. I'm assuming that is what could have happened because I
But
don't.
you don't know. You're
Well,
assuming it could have happened, but you don't know?
I remember handing the requested cases to the clerk and saying, listen, I don't know how to get these. Can you assist me? I do not remember what happened after that.
How long were you in the law library?
I don't remember, obviously, for a while.
What's a while?
Several hours, I would assume. It took a while to copy them. I do remember 50, 60 plus copies.
For all of the cases?
Yeah, at least.
And do you remember the names of any of the cases?
No, I do not.
And you said that you read through some of the cases because you knew that they were about kids getting off who had killed their parents, who were claiming sexual abuse. Is that correct?
I remember that I did not read, obviously, in detail because they were lengthy. but I remember reading like an initial paragraph that gave a synopsis of what the case was about. Do you remember reading
And
that?
all of these cases were about kids who got off because they were sexually abused.
That is what stands in my memory is reading a specific case that stated that. Yes.
Okay. And when you say got off, they were found not guilty. They were acquitted because of
Correct.
this. Is that correct?
Correct.
And all of the cases were of that type. Kids who were acquitted because they claimed sexual abuse when they were charged with killing their parents.
Well, I remember reading several of them. I do not remember the context of every single case, but several of them, yes.
All of them that you read had that same theme.
Yes.
They were charged with killing their parents. They claimed they were sexually abused and they were acquitted. Is that correct?
That's what I remember, yes.
And were these cases in California or were they in other states?
I have no idea. I do not remember.
Now, but you're very clear that they were kids who were acquitted.
Well, if you would read something like that, I'd say a red flag would go off in your head, and it did with me. I was like, whoa, surprising.
Okay. Ms. Pisarcik, you've never been to law school, is that correct?
That is very correct.
Are you aware that the cases that are published are cases that go up on appeal? That is, they're at a second level of review.
No.
Will you accept that if I tell you that at this point in time, those cases that are published are cases that are tried and someone is reviewing that case on appeal?
I guess so. I mean, if you say that's the way it is, I guess it is.
And are you aware that if someone is acquitted or found not guilty, there is no appeal?
I guess so.
Are you aware that there are no published cases of children charged with killing their parents who claim sexual abuse and are acquitted? Did you know that?
Well, maybe the ones Lyle was asking me to look at were appealed cases. I don't know that.
But you said that they were acquitted or found not guilty.
That is what I remember. Can't say that there was not an appeal on those cases.
But you remember specifically that they were found not guilty.
That was the context of the defense, yes.
Okay. And so if I tell you that there are no published cases of children who are accused of killing their parents, claim sexual abuse, and are found not guilty, do you still stand by your testimony? Yes or no?
Yes, I stand by my testimony.
Thank you. When Lyle Menendez was, well, let me go back. After you got back together with Lyle Menendez after the memorial service, you started living with him at the Marina City Club. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when did you start living with him?
I believe it was sometime in November, because after the memorial services, I was still playing tennis. I had been in Israel playing tennis.
So you lived with him November, December, and January?
Yes.
And were you working at that time?
I had started to work at the LA Tennis Club.
When did you start working there?
Shortly after I had moved. I don't know the exact date.
Can you get close?
Could December, January. I mean, I had been in town for a while, and as soon as I moved here, I started looking for a job, and it was shortly after that.
So you got a job at the LA Tennis Club in December or January, is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And before that, when you're living at the Marina City Club, who was paying the rent?
Lyle was.
Okay.
Let me stop you just for a moment, and we'll excuse the blue jury since there's some of them in the jury room. Have come back at 1:30.
And,
Let's do that first before we continue.
sorry.
I believe
indicated Lyle was paying the rent.
Yeah, it was his apartment.
And who was paying your other expenses?
I was.
And were you working for him?
Lyle had asked me to do quite a few errands and to help him. He had never balanced a checkbook, to do those type of things to really help him get back on track after his parents' death. And yes, I helped him.
So you were helping him manage his money,
Trying to.
and it was something he wasn't very good at.
No.
Is that correct? And were you being paid for that?
Lyle did help me out. We were living together, and yes, he did help me as far as financially until I got a job.
Okay. Were you getting a regular paycheck, or was he just paying your expenses?
I just remember him, when I needed some money, he would help me out. I don't recall it being a paycheck that taxes were filed on.
Okay. So when you say if you needed somebody helped you out, are we talking about $20 or $50 or $100 or?
I don't recall. I mean, it was, I had expenses, and Lyle was generous and helped me out with them. I mean,
He bought you a car, didn't he?
a Christmas present, yes.
What was it?
It was a used car, a used Saab.
And it cost about $11,000, didn't it?
I don't know.
Was it bought from Toyota at Marina Del Rey?
I don't know. He drove up with it with a red ribbon around it.
You say it was a used car.
Yes.
I mean, it wasn't a very nice car?
No, it was a nice car.
And
It was used.
how long did you keep the car?
I had it until it developed some engine problems.
How long did you keep the car?
I believe about 6 months. It could have
Did
been
you sell
longer.
the car then?
Yes, I did.
You traded it in,
Yes,
and you got what?
I got a Miata.
And how much did you get for the used car when you traded it in?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall.
I don't remember what the trade-in value of it was.
Yeah, and I have two additional exhibits I'd like to mark.
380.
And 381. And then 380 appears to be Xerox copies of 4 checks. And I'd like to show you one, the bottom of the page, dated December 21st, 1989,
Mm-hmm.
made out to Toyota Marina Del Rey
Correct?
for $11,199.
Yes.
That'd be about the time that he bought you the car.
Well, it was a Christmas present, so yes.
Showing you what we've marked as 381, which appear to be 2 original checks. Do you recognize the handwriting on those checks?
Yes.
Whose handwriting is it?
Well, that's Lyle's
The
and
signature?
signature, and where it says paycheck
memo
is last. Yes.
And who it's made out to, the
It's,
amount and the dates are all your handwriting, is that correct?
yes.
And is one of them dated December 10th, 1989?
Correct.
And how much is that for?
$700.
And is one of them dated December 19th, 1989?
Yes.
And how much is that one for?
$750.
And the notation at the bottom, which you said is Lyle's handwriting, says paycheck?
Yes, that one does.
Were you also involved, even after Lyle was arrested, in helping him run his business affairs?
I would not call it helping him run his business affairs. I cared about Lyle very much, and he obviously needed some help, but I was there to support him.
Did you give him business advice?
If you call balancing a checkbook business advice,
But you never gave him any other advice about what he should buy or sell or who he should hire or how much he should pay them or anything like that?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall.
if I did, I do not recall.
So that wasn't really your role. You really weren't involved in running the business.
What business are you talking about?
He owned a restaurant when he was arrested, didn't he?
Yes,
That's the business I'm talking about. Were you involved in running the restaurant at all?
not in running it. I don't, not in the day-to-day activities as far as running, no.
How about advising him on decisions connected to it?
Well, I didn't think it was a good idea for him to purchase a restaurant, if
No,
that's what you mean.
I'm talking about after he's arrested.
Mhm.
If you remember being involved in helping him make business decisions.
I don't know, if Lyle asked my advice, I'm sure I gave him my opinions and my advice.
So you gave him opinions about who to hire,
I don't recall.
how much to pay them.
If Lyle asked me what the normal rate of what he thought he should pay an employee, I'm sure I probably gave him an opinion. I was in the workforce at the time, and Lyle was not.
But you really didn't care that much. It's just if he asked, you gave him an opinion. Is that correct?
That's what I remember right now.
Kenner, may I approach with 382,
And what is this?
a letter written by Ms. Pisarcik to Lyle Menendez while
Date.
he's in jail.
The date?
It's undated. It's clear that he's in jail. She may be able to date it from the
All right,
sequence of events.
okay.
Do you know someone named Eric Cam?
Yes.
And is Eric Cam a friend of Lyle Menendez's?
Yes, and I believe he was involved with the restaurant as well.
Yes.
Showing you what we've marked as 382, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
You recognize the handwriting?
Yes.
Is that your handwriting?
Yes, it is.
Do you remember the card?
Yeah.
I'd ask you to start with the word hope and read it out loud.
Okay. Hope you're having a good day. Last time we spoke, we kind of fought or discussed, I guess, our different opinions on Eric's salary. I'm still adamant about you paying him no more than $22,000 with bonuses if he produces. Do you realize that the restaurant has to come up with $100,000 by January, or you have to sell it?
Keep going.
I know you may not care, but I do very much. So I won't let you give him more than that. I don't care if you say it's none of my business. It is. I thought we were a team.
Keep going.
Please take my advice. Try it. Maybe you can give him a percentage, or I'm not sure what that is. It's a notation or something. But be a real businessman, Menendez, not someone that gets taken advantage of. And don't argue that he's your friend. If he is, then he'd be glad to work for you for peanuts and prove himself.
Keep going.
Okay. Find out what real friends are, Lyle. Maybe you shouldn't even hire him if you can't distinguish between an employee and a friend. I'm serious about this. I won't let you go throwing money away again. Sure, maybe it's not my money to worry about. But I don't care. You are mine. And I'm sick of having people, friends or not, take advantage of you.
Okay. You've indicated that at some point while Lyle Menendez was in jail, he gave you back the engagement ring. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Mhm.
Do you still have it?
No, I do not.
What'd you do with it?
I tried on 2 separate occasions to give it back to Lyle.
What
And
did you do with it? Where is it now?
I don't have it. But I did try to give it back to him on 2 separate occasions.
I realize you're volunteering this information because you think that this is going to be hurtful to Lyle, but my
Excuse me,
question,
Your Honor, can counsel's
Mike.
comment be stricken, please?
Yes,
Mike.
the remark is stricken. Why don't you just ask the question again?
my question is, where is the ring now?
I do not know. I do not have that ring now.
What did you do with the ring?
Several of the stones fell out and were lost.
The diamonds?
Yes. And then I sold the remaining stone.
What'd you do with the money?
No, Your Honor.
Overall.
I'm sure I put it in my bank.
At some point, you were told by Lyle Menendez he had killed his parents. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at some point, you got a new boyfriend, is that correct?
Yes.
When did you get the new boyfriend?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Overall.
In December of I was told the truth in December of 1989. Am I correct in saying that?
When he was in jail?
When he was in jail.
Would have been December of 90.
December of 1990. And it was after Lyle had told me the truth. It was after that.
Up to that time, you believed that he had not killed his parents. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was in spite of the fact that you'd been sent to the law library to research these cases you've told us about?
Well, that's when I started. That was one of the things that had started me questioning Lyle's innocence.
But once you knew that he was charged with this and had in fact killed his parents, you got a new boyfriend. Is that right? Yes or no?
Your Honor, objection is irrelevant.
Overall.
Yes or no?
After I found out,
Yes or no?
Excuse me, argumentative, Your Honor.
could you restate the question?
Afterwards, did you get a new boyfriend?
After I found out the truth, yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Redirect.
All right, Your Honor, I have here an exhibit I'd like to mark it as exhibit next in order, please.
383.
Thank you. It's a 5-page document. It's a letter from Lyle Development. My brush, please.
Yes.
Ms. Pisarcik, I'm showing you a letter. I'd like to ask you if you recognize it, specifically the first page.
Yes, I do.
I believe there were questions by Ms. Lansing about whether you had provided Detective Zoller with some documentation. Is this the documentation that you provided to Detective Zoller in November of this year?
Yes.
And this particular letter is dated February the 26th of 1990. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was that the only contact you had with Lyle Development in order to try to straighten out who in fact had sponsored your trip to Europe?
Well, I had contacted Wally for that specific purpose.
You contacted who?
I'm sorry, Wally Null. J. Wally Null is his name.
All
I'm
right.
going to object to strike as non-responsive. The question is, was this the only?
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
After you got this letter from Wally Null, did you get any other letters from Mr. Null on the subject matter of who had sponsored you?
No, that was the letter.
Okay, so it wasn't that you contacted him in 1993, it was that you contacted him in 1990?
Yes.
And from the letter, was it your understanding that Mr. Menendez had not been a secret sponsor of yours for the trip to Europe?
Yes.
During the time that Lyle Menendez was in custody, did your mother loan him $10,000?
Yes.
And what does your mother do for a living?
She is a clerk at a department store.
Does she have any other source of
I'm
income?
going to object and ask her coach.
All right. Okay.
Ms. Pisarcik, your mother is a clerk in a department store, is that correct?
Yes.
And this money was just a loan, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, I believe that shortly after you reunited, well, let me back up. When you saw Lyle Menendez in Princeton, you were questioned by Ms. Lansing about the fact that there were some difficult times after that because of his parents' deaths, correct?
Correct.
Was it during this period of time that Lyle Menendez was also telling you that the mob had killed his parents?
Yes.
The Beverly Hills house, at the time that you moved into it, did it still have a gate across the front of it?
Yes.
Were there any other kind of security precautions at the Beverly Hills house that your apartment didn't have?
Well, yes, very much so. It was much more of a closed, confined area where my apartment was an open walk-up. No, just the door.
Were there any, was there a security system at the house in Beverly Hills when you were living there, to your knowledge?
I believe there was, yes.
Were you aware of the fact that Lyle Menendez's jail cell was searched in June of 1990?
I mean, at that time, I remember Lyle at one time telling me that his jail cell had been searched.
And did you continue to send him letters and books after the time that you became aware that his jail cell had been searched?
I would imagine so, yes. If it was June of 1990.
well, without specifying the time, after you learned that from Lyle Menendez that his cell had been searched, did you continue to write him letters and send him things?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you have any training in legal research?
No.
Have you ever taken a course in college, like business law or any kind of law courses?
No.
And when you went into the law library in Santa Monica, was that the first time that you had ever been in a law library?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what the lesser included offenses to murder are?
No.
Do you know anything about criminal procedure?
No.
Do you know what I mean when I say criminal procedure?
No.
Okay. Do you know what manslaughter is? Can you define manslaughter?
Yes. I think.
All right.
I would assume it would be killing someone.
All right. Do you know what the difference between voluntary and involuntary manslaughter is?
I'm going to object to the relevance.
Sustain.
Okay. Ms. Pisarcik, when you went into that law library, would it be fair to say that you didn't have much knowledge of criminal law?
Yes, that's very correct.
And my last question for you is, did you want to testify for the prosecution in this case?
No.
Thank you.
Recross.
Mr. Pisarcik, how many times have you met with the prosecution?
2 times formally, and then the one time that they first came to my door.
And has the defense written letters to you and asked to interview you?
You did write one letter, I believe.
Okay. And did you write me back saying you refuse?
I just said that I did not wish to have any, anything to do with the case.
Okay. And have you refused to talk to the defense ever since?
I refused to talk to anyone until I was subpoenaed.
But you did meet with the prosecution, with Detective Zoller, Mrs. Bazanish, Mr. Kuriyama, is that correct?
Upon subpoena, correct?
Well, you weren't subpoenaed when they came to your house and talked to you. Were you?
Well, I opened the door and they were there.
Okay. But it wasn't a subpoena.
No, that was not.
With regard to Mr. Now, did you have any other contact with him besides this letter of February 1990 on this issue?
Well, I called him stating, asking him Wally, that was his name, Wally, Mr. Nall. It has been told to me that Lyle Menendez's father paid for my sponsorship, and I'm very confused at this. I'm aware of all of the sponsors that were involved. So yes, I did call him with my concern, and he said that no, Mr. Menendez was not involved, and
Okay.
that he would
Can you
provide
stop?
a letter.
A second.
Mhm.
This was because Lyle had told you before he was arrested even that his father had told him he had done that. Is that correct?
No, Lyle was in jail when he told me that.
So Lyle was in jail when he told you that his father had done the sponsorship. Is that correct?
I'm not sure the exact.
What, was he in jail or not? I mean, when you found out about that, when Lyle told you that his father had told him
Mhm.
that his father had sponsored you, was Lyle Menendez in jail or not?
I do remember having a discussion with him when he was in jail.
And is that when you contacted Mr. Now?
I don't know. I mean,
Had you contacted Mr. Now before that?
I contacted Mr. Nall when Lyle told me that.
Okay, now my question was he in jail or not in jail when he told you and you contacted Mr. Now?
I believe the letter was of February 26th, 1990. Is that correct?
Yes?
So Lyle was in jail, in March?
Well, I'm asking if you have
I
any
don't-
memory of when this conversation took place. Do you remember?
I remember talking to Mr. Nall, yes.
I'm asking you about the conversation
Oh.
with Lyle Menendez.
I'm sorry. I remember talking to Lyle about it when he was in jail, yes.
Okay. And after that, you contacted Mr. Now.
I would assume that it would have been, yeah, when Lyle told me. So, of course.
Okay, so you contacted Mr. Now when Lyle told you, and Lyle
Right.
told you after he'd been arrested. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
That's your testimony.
I think that is, yes. I mean, I remember Lyle talking to us, discussing that when Lyle was in jail. I am not sure if that conversation came up prior to him being in jail, though.
Okay,
If
but
that's what you're
which-
asking.
If it came up prior to it, when would it have been that you contacted Mr. Now? After the jail conversation?
Well, after the first time that Lyle mentioned it to me.
And you have no idea whether that was in jail or not when he first mentioned it to you?
From what I can remember, it was when he was in jail. You know, I remember that conversation.
Okay, so that's your memory now, is that he told you for the first time after he was in jail and you contacted Mr. Now and got the letter. Is that correct?
If I remember correctly, yes.
Okay. Now, the letter is dated February
Right.
26th, 1990. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you know what date Lyle Menendez was arrested?
He did go in March.
He got arrested in March of 1990. So you'd already contacted Mr. Now and gotten this letter back from him before Lyle Menendez was ever arrested. Isn't that correct?
That does sound correct, yes.
Yes, it does. You indicated that your mother loaned Lyle Menendez $10,000 after he was in jail. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do your mother and Lyle Menendez have a close relationship?
Lyle, against mine and my family's wishes, still continues to contact my mother.
And is it against your mother's wishes?
I believe, yes, it is.
So she hangs up when he calls.
Objection, calls for speculation, hearsay.
Sustained.
Why do you believe it's against your mother's wishes?
Your Honor, same objection.
Right, it was already asked and she answered it regardless of why. Why don't you ask another question?
The $10,000 that your mother loaned to Lyle
Mhm.
was when you two were still seeing each other. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe it was when Lyle was in jail, though.
And he paid it back very shortly thereafter, didn't he?
Shortly, yes.
And your mother had a very good relationship with him at that time, didn't she? When she loaned him the $10,000?
Well, I don't believe she would have loaned it to him otherwise.
And you talked about the apartment you were living in versus the Beverly Hills house.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
What was the address of the apartment you were living in?
I don't remember. It was in Westwood. Or there was also another one after that, too, in Brentwood.
What apartment were you in before you moved into the Beverly Hills house?
In Westwood.
What street?
I don't remember.
And you don't remember the address?
Not off the top of my head, I do not.
And you had a roommate named Deanna Berry?
Correct.
And what kind of a building was it?
It was a 2-story, and you just kind of walked up the stairs to the apartment.
Okay. And the guest house that you were staying in,
Mhm.
I believe Mrs. Pisarcik asked you about the iron gate in the front.
Yes.
The closest way to get to the guest house was through the alley, is that correct?
There was an access there, yes.
Okay. And was there an iron gate on that entry?
There was a gate. It was not iron, but there was a gate and a lock.
Okay. A wooden gate?
Yes, I believe so.
Kind of gate that a pool man would come in and out of when he came to do servicing, that type of thing?
I don't know.
So it's just a wooden gate?
Yes.
Yeah. When Mrs. Pisarcik was talking about the research that you were doing, I believe in your testimony before, you said that seeing the word acquittal was a red flag to you. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that I said the word acquittal. Maybe you did.
Not guilty?
There was red flags. They were child abuse cases. There was red flags,
Where people were found not guilty.
as I remember.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else?
No.
All right, thank you. You may step down. You're excused. We'll resume at 1:30, ladies and gentlemen. See you back here at 1:30.